Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's call to order. My name is Lee Bishop. I'm the Deputy Designated Federal Official for the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. Welcome. Those who have joined us virtually and those who are in the room here at the Historic Lodge today. Just as a matter of safety and function, behind us over here on my left are several exits to the outside if we have to leave for whatever reason. The facilities are actually behind me, behind the chimney here, the fireplace down the hallway if you need facilities as well. There are refreshments over here on the side. Please help yourself to the extent you want. With that, Madam Vice Chair, I will gavel in this meeting and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lee. I hope you can hear me. I have 3 mute buttons. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Great, I see you. Thank you, folks. All right, well, welcome to the May 2023 Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board meeting. I'm Elena, your Vice Chair, filling in for our Chair, who will be joining us shortly. We are attending and broadcasting live from historic Fuller Lodge in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And I have to say, if you haven't had the opportunity to tour the lodge, please do so. Due to the popularity of Fuller Lodge, we will adjourn the meeting early today and promptly at 4:30 to give our office and the Santa Fe audio-visual team time to wrap up as well. I wish I could join you in person, but I had another meeting directly preceding this one and want to be respectful to everyone by not rushing from and to each meeting. As a reminder, our meetings are being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube, so please speak up. And if you have video capabilities and you're online, please go ahead and turn that on as well. For our members attending at Fuller Lodge, our Santa Fe audiovisual team will now present a quick AV tutorial.
Most of you folks have seen these mics before. It just has the right side button here where it has a little human on it. You push that and you are live to talk. Push it, turn it off, that's it.
All right. Thank you. You have in front of you and emailed to you the agenda, minutes, and meeting packet. Also in the meeting packet, our speaker today, Erich Everett's bio and presentation. Please be sure to take some time to read Erich's impressive bio if you're not familiar with him. Thank you for being here today, Erich. Now I would like to begin the meeting with introductions. Today, joining us online, we have a special guest. We have Susan Coleman of the Hanford Advisory Board joining us. And it's a pleasure to have one of our sister sites attending. So thank you for being here, Susan. Now let's go around the room and have our CAB members introduce themselves, then our CAB members attending via WebEx and then on the phone. And we'll start. Manice, Lee, you have free range to start with whomever you want to start with.
Jim, you want to go ahead and get us started off?
I'm Jim Murphy, and I live in Santa Fe County.
Good afternoon, Ann Laurent, Deputy County Manager for Los Alamos County, and I also live in Los Alamos County.
Stuart Barger from La Puebla. I'm a retired architect.
Patricio Pacheco from Nambe, New Mexico, water resources specialist for the city of Santa Fe.
I'm Mark Hayden, General Counsel for the Office of Superintendent of Insurance, State of New Mexico.
Stephen Laughlin, semi-retired attorney from Santa Fe.
Not getting that one.
My name's Roger Life. I'm a CAB member for the Espanola area.
And that's our team here, Elena.
Okay, great, thank you. And let's see, going online, I see, from what I can see Marty Hewlett. Marty, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you, Elena. My name is Marty Hewlett. I'm in Taos, New Mexico, and I'm a faculty member at the University of New Mexico Taos campus.
Great. And do we see any other CAB members online, Bridget or Manice? Or by phone?
I don't see anyone else, Elena, but we do have a quorum.
Great, thank you. And then, of course, I'm Elena. I'm the vice chair of the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board, and I currently reside in Taos. Now, let's go to the audience in the room. Are there any staff, non-cab members, and members of the public that would like to introduce themselves? And please speak up.
Erich with N3B, and it'll be my pleasure to share a briefing discussion on the consent order today.
Thank you, Erich.
Matt Miller from the office of Congresswoman Teresa Ledger Fernandez. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here, Matt. Is there anybody else in the room or online? Of course, our elected officials and their honored representatives. We have Matt Miller. Is there anyone else who would like to, and members of the public?
Hello, Amanda Audette with N3B.
Thank you for being here.
Good
Scott?
afternoon. Thank you, Elena. Scott Kovac with Nuclear Watch, New Mexico.
Great, thanks.
Looks like all the volunteers you're going to get today. Most of the
I
folks,
guess so.
most of the remaining folks appear to be a lot of EMLA staff that are listening in and wanting to learn about the consent order as well, Elena.
Great, thank you, Lee, and thank you for everyone who's introduced themselves. So let's quickly look over our agenda. Today, under old business, we will have updates and consideration on a draft recommendation as patterned on the National Chair's recommendation we approved last meeting, and this will be given by Mark Hayden. Today, we will be hearing a presentation on the 2016 Compliance Order on Consent, also known as the Consent Order by N3B's Erich Everett, who just introduced himself. And then a break at about 2:40. We will have a hard stop at exactly 3 p.m. for public comment. Then an update by Michael Michelanis, apologies, Michael, our EMLA field manager. An update and look ahead from Kim Lieback, President and General Manager of N3B. Then an update from our DDFO, Lee Bishop. And do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Mark Hayden moves to accept the agenda.
Stuart Barger, second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. The motion passes. Thank you. Now please take a moment to look over the meeting minutes from the April board meeting. When you are ready, please make a motion.
Mark Hayden motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting.
Second.
And if you could state your name before
sorry.
seconding. Thank you.
Jim Murphy, second.
Jim, thank you. That way we online or on the phone who can't see you.
Got it.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay. Motion to approve. We have a motion to approve in a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Do we have a majority in the room? We do online. Okay, motion passes. All right, let's move on to, oh, my mouse is, give me just a moment. Okay, here we go. Okay, let's move on to old business. I have an update from the vice chair. I don't really have one from the chair right now. I attended the May Technical Working Group meeting that was focused on the overview of N3B projects. I encourage everyone, it is a technical working group. It can be quite technical, but I find it very useful as an excellent supplement to our work here. So if you have not attended one, please take some time and decide if it's right for you, but I think you would find it useful as I have. I also virtually attended the April NEPA public meeting on the hexavalent chromium plume. There was an in-person meeting the night before at Cities of Gold. Now on to the subcommittee chairs report. Thank you, Manise, for sending the updated list of subcommittee members. If you have not signed up for a subcommittee, please do so. And please get with Manise for that. As a reminder, all subcommittee, sorry, that's the dog. As a reminder, all subcommittee meetings are open to the public and are scheduled ahead of time, and then will be announced on the distribution list. I'm working to get the information out ahead of time for public participation, as each meeting does have a public comment period, and the public has more opportunity for involvement, and especially because we respect your right to know and transparency. So the Public Outreach Subcommittee meeting will schedule a meeting, the Public Outreach Subcommittee will schedule a meeting in the coming weeks to go over plans for the new website. So please let me know, or Bridget know, your availability. The Risk Evaluation and Management Subcommittee will also schedule a meeting in the coming weeks. We tend to meet once a month. Mark, do you have an update on the Consent Order Subcommittee?
I do, Madam Vice Chair. So the Consent Order Committee met today, 5/17 at 9:00 a.m. virtually, and we reviewed a new recommendation draft for the DOE. The recommendation draft includes the application of EMLA's Justice 40 through CAB expansion to change our charter to include the entire state, similar to every other CAB in the nation. We will report the minutes in due course. I haven't drafted them yet, but those will be submitted shortly. That's all I have. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. Okay. And as a last item under old business, unless anyone else has any other items under old business, does anyone have any other items? Okay, seeing none. Oh, is there, okay, I cannot see placards, so I'm going to rely on people in the room to let me know, Lee or Manise.
Stuart Barger, I
Stuart,
have a
please
question.
proceed. Okay, go ahead.
Can we get an update on the negotiation on the chromium plume between EM and NNMCAB?
So Mike Michelaus, Department of Energy. I'll talk about that in my update, and if it's okay with you, Stuart, let's do questions beyond what I thought to share. I'll be happy to share as best I think I can.
Okay, thank you, Stuart, and thank you, Michael. Anybody else? Another item under old business? Okay, seeing none. As a last item, I encourage all members to periodically re-review our member toolkit. If you do not have one, please contact Manise or Bridget. Also, I find it very useful. And in the toolkit, you'll find the code of conduct, the bylaws, and our national site-specific advisory board charter. And, especially for new members, I find it very useful to orient yourself within the advisory board. So let's move on to new business.
No. Back up to Mark's recommendation for approval by the CAB board.
Yeah, I have my placard up. Sorry about that. We've seen the gloss
I'm
over
sorry.
sub
I
C.
cannot see it. Go ahead.
So what I will discuss is a little bit, and thank you for that, Stuart, is the recommendation that when I went to the Washington, D.C., there was a national recommendation provided to all CABs to adopt. And this one would be adoption at the New Mexico level. So in addition to having a national recommendation, this one would be adopted at our local level. And what it is titled is DOE Response, Implementation, and Reporting on NNMCAB Recommendations. And the essence of it is that DOE provide clear and publicly accessible information regarding implementation of the NCAB recommendations for the last 5 years, that implementation recommendations have a complete status of either ongoing, suspended, or discontinued. Number 2, DOE report to the CABs at least annually, a summary of the status with a recommendation on any action item completed. And then finally, an annual summary of recommendations for use by the general public and should be drafted in layman's terms for ease of understanding. Again, this mirrors the national recommendation, but it's adoption locally for us to get the same kind of recommendations that we would if we were a national organization. And so the motion is to adopt the recommendation.
Steve McLaughlin, second.
So before we move to a motion, I would like to know if there's any discussion beforehand. Anybody in the room, please. And I am relying on people in the room to let me know if somebody has their placard up. And Mark, I apologize for moving past. Is there a discussion on this draft recommendation?
This is Jim Murphy. I just want to, Mark and I and our subcommittee have talked quite a little bit about this item, and I just want to endorse for our committee that we agree with this. I think what it feels like is we have more ongoing participation for the community and the public now in post-COVID, and I really would like to support what's going on in terms of the business we're doing. So I would say vote for this.
And I will add,
any other discussion?
Madam Chair, for last meeting, we talked a little bit about the need for it, and the need is we never really hear back from the DOE or the EMLA on the status of the recommendations. We give several a year. Years and years, decades go by, and we don't know what's been implemented and what's not. We can kind of tell, we can see some things, but it's not like an annual report, and this requires a written annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Does anyone else have something they'd like to bring up regarding this draft recommendation?
So sure, if you don't mind real quickly as DDFO. So in the past, we actually had a running table that we would give to the staff and to the CAB, and we go over that each meeting. But I think with the up and coming website, we can have that almost live on the website once we get that launched. So any of our members can go there at any time and see the status of a recommendation. So we have your recommendation as we're discussing now. You certainly can vote on it as is, but more likely than not, our response would be back to you is to have a live open. So I'm not asking you to edit anything, but our response more likely than not will be back that we'll maintain that on the website.
Thank you for that. That's an excellent solution, and I really appreciate that effort.
Yes, thank you, Lee. Thank you, Mark. Anybody else?
Stuart Barger,
Okay.
call the question.
Stuart, proceed.
Call the question. Call for a vote.
Yes, excuse me. All right, are we ready to entertain a motion again? Marty?
Mark, oh, go ahead.
Well, I move approval.
Second.
Madam Chair, you have a motion and a second, so you can call for the vote now.
Thank you. Let's call for a vote.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
And motion approves, vote approves. All right. Thank you. Now, moving on to new business. All right. So, for new business, we are
Elena?
looking. Yes.
Jim here. Before we go on, under other items on old business, I guess this would fit there. I just wanted to congratulate Lee particularly, but all the effort that is going on right now to get the public more involved in everything we're doing. I think most of the people here know that my interest, since I got on the committee, has been in getting more and more information to what I loosely call the other public, which are the people who live out there and they don't have the opportunity to attend our meetings even online the way it has been. And I know that the work that you all are doing to get that population more involved is a great piece of work. So I wanted to say that publicly, and Lee, I'll give you all the credit. You can spread it around if you want. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for your comments, Jim. Yes, we've always been very inclusive to the public, and we've done the best that we have, given the limitations based on the past few years of COVID. But now that we're able to open up our meetings to the public in person, and that we continue hybrid, we have that access and inclusion through the hybrid system, and I'm grateful that we are able to move forward that way and progress through the technological advances given to us for that access. So thank you, everyone who's worked so hard on this and bringing us to this point so that we can open up our meetings again to the public in person, I should say. All right. Anything else under old business? Okay, nothing? All right. New business. We are looking for 2 CAB members to lead the nominating committee for next year's chair and vice chair positions. We fill these positions once a year. So if you are interested in being on that nominating committee, contact Manise, or you can state out loud now if you're interested. Okay, I am seeing no volunteers just yet. Please think about it and
Wait a minute,
contact.
wait. Here, I can't help but say that. I'm going to nominate Mark to be on the committee.
On the nominating committee? Okay.
Yes. I'm nominating Mark to be on the nominating committee. So now he has to state positively whether he'll do it or not.
Back at you, Jim.
So that's Mark and Jim. Good.
So Mark and Jim, do you accept the task of being on the nominating committee, which means contacting our members and asking them who they would support as vice chair or chair for the next?
No, I won't do it because I want to be chair. No, I'm kidding.
Actually,
No.
I'm happy to do that. Something I could do over lunch at my desk.
Electing unanimously now.
Quickly, yeah.
Yes, I'll help where I can. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just to be clear, anyone serving on the nominating committee is welcome to run for chair or vice chair. This would be for the next fiscal year, beginning October 1st. So Sherilyn and Elena will continue their duties through that day. But we would like to get the nominating committee situated, and in fact, your bylaws call for that at this point. So leaving this meeting, we need to have that in place. And then we'll have election of officers at the July meeting when the nominating committee reports. And the reason we have to do it kind of early is because of the chairs meeting scheduled in the fall. We need to know who's going to go and be able to plan for their travel and that sort of thing. And as you know, that takes a while to get done. So anyone running for chair or vice chair, we would ask that you be able to travel to the chairs meetings if possible, and then to any other meetings to speak on behalf of the board. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Manise. I appreciate that. That's very helpful.
One more serious question about this. Do we have any criteria?
The criteria for the new members, the new officers?
Well, or if we're going to be a nominating committee, is there any criteria for what our group would like to have in terms of the people that we finally appoint?
So
I heard travel, okay.
travel
there
is
anything
one.
else?
The other is having been vetted to be on this board. You meet the criteria. We would like someone that's been on the board for at least a year, so they have a little bit better understanding of protocols and how we conduct board business, but that is not a requirement.
Gray hair counts.
And of course, just the time to give. Of course, just the time to give. It's not an extraordinarily amount of time that is required other than the travel, more than a regular member. But you would be speaking on behalf of the CAB, so, and chairing the meetings.
Manish, quick, is there any conflict with that, with terms of positions or being on the board? Is there any conflict that you're aware of?
I don't know in what reference, what kind of
Well, if you were to accept the position down the road, but would being on the nominating committee prevent you from doing that?
No.
Okay.
That's right.
All right, I nominate Jim.
And all we would ask the nominating committee to do is split the list of members, contact them, ask them if they have a nominee in mind, and you are welcome to nominate yourself, and then report to the board in July, at which time we'll take the vote. Is that kind of clear, or? Great. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Mark.
Well, as long as we're on a roll. Would it be appropriate for both Mark and me and anybody else that wants to be on the nominating committee to give out our email addresses so that members can, I think they're in our record, but they could get a hold of you to get our emails, and feel free to treat it as a way to get to us as soon as possible.
So Jim, if we're settled on the issue, Bridget will send that out to everybody, notifying them how to contact you via email.
Perfect. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Patricio.
I did want to mention I'd be happy to help on the nominating committee as well. I do recall last time we went around doing this, I do have a copy of my Excel sheet that I believe marking chair, vice chair, and who was nominating for who. But I'd be happy to pass that along to the group and to the nominees, the committee, and we can work forward on that.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Patricio. Thank you for helping. And yes, you were on the nominating committee last time, so thank you for your service on that. I've served on that committee twice before, and I've always appreciated an Excel spreadsheet on that. So it is very helpful to keep track.
Madam Chair, Steve has a question.
Okay, go ahead, Steve.
Madam Vice Chair, do we know what the dates of this required travel are, just out of curiosity?
Would you please turn on your microphone?
It's on. Yeah.
The fall chairs meeting is the week of October 2nd, and that's in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. It's being hosted by the Oak Ridge Advisory Board. And then there's a spring meeting, but the dates have not been set yet. Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Yes, so Madam Chair, just as a course of business, with this nomination, we do drop down, and the individual committees need to also take this action and work within their committees to come up with a nomination for the chair of each of their committees as well, please.
Oh, okay, that's very good to know. Thank you, Lee. Then I will inform my two subcommittees. Okay. Any other comments or questions on this subject? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Mark and Jim and Patricio, for your assistance on this. Now, do we have any other items under new business?
Stuart Barger, I have one.
Okay, Stuart, please go ahead.
Okay, so it's my understanding that N3B is in the process of preparing a corrective measures evaluation for material disposal area H, and that has to be submitted in September, I believe, Eric. But as of our last board meeting, Eric requested comments from CAB members by June 1st or June 15th. But the CME is not available for review at this point. By chance, I happen to have gone to the library and read the CME that was done for this area in 2008. I think it's been surpassed by one that was done in 2011, but that's the only reference I have. So I'm not sure how this board, first of all, is going to react in time before the CME is prepared, nor how any of us are qualified to propose corrective measures or choices for N3B to consider. And typically there are 4 or 5, starting with do nothing and ending with take it all out. And I think in this issue, at least 2 cap and cover areas. But this may surprise you, but I don't think I'm qualified to propose any measure in between, although probably will. So I'd like a little guidance on how we proceed. At our last meeting, I believe Lee said that what happens is that this goes to NMED for their review, and at some point is off to the public for review after they make their, but reviewing NMED's really decision. So I'm not quite sure how we as a board are going to have input into this corrective measures evaluation. So I'm asking for some guidance here.
So the best opportunity is with the CME. It's a little bit like the public meetings I held last week in this very room on the EA for Chrome, the environmental assessment, NEPA assessment on Chrome. And really the input we're looking for here is what alternatives would you like us to consider in that evaluation? So certainly, I mean, you have the full spectrum of complete removal to cap and cover to strategic removal, and there may be some other creative alternative we need to consider in that evaluation. So this is kind of a scoping question, if you will. Within that CME, what alternatives would, you certainly can provide comments as an individual, or if the CAB has a recommendation for one of the alternatives or an alternative not considered, then we can use David Deal's presentation from the last CAB meeting to give us guidance as to what that might look like if the CAB is so inclined to make a recommendation.
So how and when we're doing this, I mean, our next CAB meeting's in July, and we have this one. So is this a subject we discuss right now in terms of new business, or do we do this individually as CAB members or individually as private citizens?
We can certainly, if you want, set up a combined committee meeting in the, I'm trying to figure out what month it is, in the June time period to have that discussion, just a virtual meeting.
Well, I think that would be great, where in that meeting, that is what we discuss, because, I mean, on the risk committee, I mean, Manny and I have had a little back and forth. We're probably at opposite spectrums on what each of us would recommend in terms of CME. So I first of all, I can't imagine CAB coming to a consensus on a proposal. So this is mostly us as individual members expressing what our opinion, our personal opinion might be.
So I think it's more about laying out the appropriate alternatives and what alternatives would you like considered in that analysis. And then we can give that direction to N3B when they prepare the CME, because ultimately, as you'll learn today, the Department of Energy does not make, it will make a recommendation in the CME of what alternative we would like to pursue, but it's the state of New Mexico that will choose the remedy.
Okay, well, at the last presentation that was made on this, we got to the end of the presentation before we got to the end of the questions. And when I asked about complete removal, well, at some point in there, the gentleman that was going to be in charge of this said he wouldn't touch it, which I appreciate. I'm not being flippant with that. Obviously, he felt very sincerely about not, but I have no idea why he wouldn't touch it. And Manny tells me there's what, 1,200 pounds of explosive buried in these things. And so I don't know, how it got there, why it didn't explode on its way there. So, I mean, I really, as you all know, I'm a proponent for complete removal, but I have no idea what that means.
Okay, so we can have those additional discussions, and you're correct. It probably was a little biased, but he did provide his professional opinion as to how he would proceed. And if that biased you, I apologize in any way. That we may need to correct that behavior in the future. But yeah, if there's an alternative, and if there's a spectrum of alternatives we should consider, do we need to consider, and from your evaluation, do we need to consider the full spectrum of alternatives, or is removal and the health and safety something that we should consider?
Well, I'd certainly like to have that joint meeting. I don't want to impose more meetings on everyone else here, but I would come.
I think it'd be very easy to have a combined CAB meeting virtually in the June time period to have that discussion, and we'll get Eric, my colleague over my shoulder here, to staff that appropriately, so you guys can have those additional questions.
Thank you.
I have an add-on to that. Stuart probably, and Manny probably, and maybe some others in the room might have an idea of what a full spectrum means. I have none.
Okay, I apologize. That would be the no action of mainly capping and covering and watching it for 100 years under the stewardship program, all the way to going in with protective equipment, shielded equipment, and removing every ounce of material in there and disposing of it appropriately, which is highly challenging because high explosives don't get more stable over time, not in the near first few decades anyway, before they degrade and no longer reactive.
Okay, let me just add another piece to that then. If a full spectrum discussion, probably led by Eric or you in the combined meeting in June, is the appropriate way to attack this, I'd fully support that, because it should be obvious after my tenure on this committee that I have no idea what Stuart means. I have no idea what chromium means. And I'm very open to hearing from the people who do know those things. I'd just like a little preview, dissertation, take your pick, in a combined meeting before we start discussing it. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Lee, and thank you, Jim.
Mark has
Lee,
a
thank
question.
you Mark has a question. Okay. I've been trying to get in for a moment. So Mark, just before your question, let me go ahead. Point of privilege. So I did want to say that for the public's benefit, for those of them who may not understand, who's online, who have just joined us, MDAH, where those old explosives were put in the ground. What they were in the beginning, they have changed over time, and Lee did touch on that. They may become unstable. They have altered over time. So when they went into the ground is very different from how they are now. So they may be more reactive. So I appreciate that, Lee. And to help for Jim's benefit, if you also attend the technical working groups, that will also give you a deeper, as you said, a dissertation, not necessarily in everyday terms. It is more technical, more scientific, more STEM based, but it would also give you a supplement to deeper understanding. Okay, Mark, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This has to do with a couple of things. First, I like Lee's idea of a combined committee meeting in June. I think that gives us a chance to really digest some things and to focus on what we need to decide as a group. And the other part of it is the New Mexico Environment Department really does have the expertise and the time to digest all the material and to come up with proposals. So I'm not feeling like we're neglectful if we don't have a recommendation. But on the other hand, I'm still a little confused about the hexavalent chromium solution, because I hear that there's no modeling that is used, but that the injection methodology of treated water to form a hydro wall to push this stuff back or retain it is somehow viable, but I have yet to hear whether it is viable and has been successful in the past. So I think question and answer might be good in June. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. One more quick thing.
Yes, quickly, please.
I think I misspoke.
Go ahead, Jim.
I think I misspoke when I said I don't know anything about this stuff. That's not a fair thing to say. I was just trying to make a point. I've learned a great amount in this last year about these things, but my pitch is, in June, can we come together with what the wide range of alternatives are that should be considered? And let's not spend any time talking about things that shouldn't be considered. Maybe that makes some sense.
Yep, I'm looking.
So
Eric gave me the high sign on
focused.
that. Manise has administrative duties to get that pulled together. So for the notification in the Federal Register, the best date right now would probably be June 28th, Wednesday before the holiday weekend, is if that's acceptable, and we'll see what we can do as far as getting that on the calendar, Bridget. And a reminder, the David Deal's presentation is on YouTube. Search Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. So if you want to walk through that on your own time and fast forward through that, whatever technique you want to use to refresh yourself as to what was in that presentation and make some notes. And then I'll work with Eric to, as a tool for that meeting, to have a list of reasonable alternatives built in there, the full spectrum. And when we say reasonable, I've worked on a lot of radioactive waste issues, and some people have brought up, well, let's put it in a missile and shoot it to the moon. Well, it was considered but not analyzed in detail, because actually the biggest hazard there is leaving the atmosphere and the rocket failing. Ask Elon Musk about that, and spreading that all over the area, right? So we'll give you the full spectrum of reasonable alternatives that you guys can discuss. And again, revisit that YouTube video, some of our small steps we're making to make it a little more transparent for you guys.
All right. Thank you, Jim. Thank you all members for your questions, and thank you, Lee, for
Mark and
response.
Roger are still asking questions.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah.
I can't see the cards, so thank you for keeping me on track there. Go ahead, Roger.
Yeah, this was just a quick question on, you spoke to a date, but what would be the location for that meeting?
It'd be completely virtual.
Oh, virtual, okay.
Is there a preference to afternoon or morning?
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Manny?
Thank you, Roger. Manny?
Lee, I'd just like to make a suggestion, is that we have some type of a graphic that can actually show one of those shafts, and how that material, what that material in the shaft and how it's packaged, contained.
Okay.
I think that would give us a better appreciation of the hazards involved and the difficulty in removing it.
Noted.
That's an excellent suggestion, Manny. And to follow up on Lee's comment, not only is Dave Deal's presentation online, you also have the slides in your meeting packet that were emailed to you and to people on the distribution list. So those are accessible, but if you don't have those, please do go to our YouTube channel. Do we have any more?
If I may, Elaine. This is Mark Hayden.
Yes, please.
The one suggestion I have for that June meeting is to get a balanced view and really a good perspective with people who are in the know, is to invite the Environment Department from New Mexico to weigh in and give us a little insight to where they're going.
I'll take that action.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good suggestion. Okay, last chance, because I'd like to respond. Yes, go ahead, Denise.
Madam Chair
Yes.
and Lee, what time do you want to meet finally? I need to
I have a
the
motion for mid-morning.
10 to noon?
10 works.
10 to noon on June the 28th.
That works fine for me. Thank you.
Okay. That's going into the Federal Register tomorrow, so that's a done deal.
Perfect. Thank you, Manise.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, excellent discussion. Thank you, members. Thank you, Lee, for following up. We need to move on now, and we have a presentation on the 2016 compliance order on consent from Erich Everett. And Erich, I give it to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to be here, and I have asked for, thank you.
Go ahead and bring up channel 4.
Test,
Channel 4 into the main mix.
test,
Keep coming.
1, 2, 3, 4. Test, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're good.
Eric, remember to turn off your other mic.
I can do it.
I just did. This one's live, right?
Yes.
I'm going to start here. Yeah.
Cool.
I had asked for some mobility because seeing a speaker glued to the podium or to the lectern is not something I enjoy seeing, and I presume you don't either. So I'd like to exercise some freedom to move around. Again, my name is Erich Everett. I'm with the Environmental Remediation Program at N3B. We are the prime contractor to the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Los Alamos Field Office in executing the legacy cleanup at Los Alamos. It's delightful to be in this building again. Every time I enter the building, I just feel the aura here, the history. And in the cleanup program, we honor the past, and this is an excellent emblem of the past for this community. The CAB has asked for this briefing on the consent order to help improve your understanding of this 200-some page document, which is quite understandably and necessarily in legalese, which is not friendly to the average citizen to read and understand. It is the document, the agreement that parties have entered into to govern the cleanup at Los Alamos. So I'll begin in just a moment, but I wanted to say how much I appreciate being here with you again. I appreciate your interest, and I compliment you on this outstanding turnout of so many of the members here in person at Fuller Lodge. Bottom line up front, Bridget, go ahead and flip 2 slides, please. One more. All right. I should have inverted the order of these 2 in the briefing, and I'll do it now just for sake of logic in the presentation. The corrective action process outlined in the consent order is truly where the rubber meets the road, and that, I believe, is where you will want to focus the most of your attention. So I'm going to lead with that now to help frame the context, and then we'll go through the consent order from front to back, covering the highlights and the key aspects of it, or all of the aspects of it actually, to make sure I haven't left any holes in your understanding. But you may find certain parts of more interest than others. But I believe that this part will help set the context for the discussion about the consent order and how it is used to drive the process through investigation, documentation, cleanup, and approval that in fact cleanup has been accomplished as intended. So we have under the guiding law, which is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, we will often refer to it as such, this process, which is implemented at the state level through the Hazardous Waste Act and then is embodied in the consent order. So it's all consistent top to bottom. The facility investigation work plan, we don't do anything in the program without establishing a plan, submitting that to NMED, and getting NMED's approval. That plan outlines the process we're going to use in doing the investigation and remediation of contamination found. Then we do the investigation, which includes, it's a field mobilization. We got in the field, do the sampling, send the samples off to laboratory analysis while we're still working in the field, getting the results back, establishing an understanding of the nature of contamination and the extent of it at the site. We just hear us say nature and extent. That's what we're talking about. Once we have a good understanding of that, and do a risk assessment of what that contamination means to you as a citizen in terms of the risk at that site because of the contamination. And this is the topic that Patricia Wald-Hopkins described in detail in March for the CAB, the risk assessment based on the contamination present. We do that, and if we determine through that risk assessment that the risk exceeds certain criteria of acceptability, then remediation will take place to clean it up and bring it below that threshold risk. So that's the facility investigation that takes place. And all of that is documented in the investigation report. And these are for sites typical in the aggregate area soils cleanup program where there is not a corrective measures evaluation process required. That will be the next slide. It's a longer, more extended process. But for the soil cleanups, this is the simple, straightforward process. You got the work plan submitted, it has to be approved before we go to the field, do the investigation and remediation, finish that. Sometimes we iterate. If we find that we need more information, we'll do that. Hopefully in the new approach, there's a single phase of mobilization rather than phases 1, 2, and maybe 3 over years. So we're trying to get rid of the multiple phase process and go with one. And then when we're done, the investigation report is produced and delivered to NMAD. That includes the final risk assessment based on the state following remediation to demonstrate that no unacceptable risk is present. And included in that investigation report is our request for the certificate of completion for each of the SHMOOs and AOCs. And I'll get to those in just a moment. Okay? Any questions on that simple version of the process? The next page, next slide, we'll go back to number 2.
So Eric, just for clarification, if you're not used to terminology, we're using the term facility relatively broadly here. Typically that's a solid waste management unit or an area of concern, and more likely than not it's going to be out in the center of a field or around an old foundation. I mean, there are some buildings still left that we need to quote, investigate, but like building 257 at TA21, the wastewater treatment plant, the facility is a more generic term of the area within that technical area that we're evaluating.
Right. We're drawing terminology from the RCRA law that sometimes is confusing or not exactly correct for what we mean it to be. You're quite rightly. So, next slide. Previous, yeah, my next previous slide, yes. All right, now, in the consent order, there are 9 cleanup projects that are designated or identified by NMAD as requiring a corrective measures evaluation. And in that vein, it's because investigations have been conducted, investigation reports delivered with risk assessments, and it yielded a level of risk and complexity and often size that led NMAD to say, you know, we really need to go with a CME process. So these 9 you got to do. And those were agreed to by DOE in the consent order. So the corrective measures evaluation, which we have discussed a bit with regard to MDAH, it's identifying and assessing measures for dealing with the contamination of the waste present. Removal or containment or treatment are eligible areas of dealing with it. And we use the threshold and balancing criteria that were talked about as well. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to discuss that. But it is a proceduralized process that originated with EPA in the implementing regulations for RCRA and flows through to the consent order, identical to the original EPA guidance that we use to have an objective and repeatable process to assess remedial alternatives. And in that process, it yields a recommendation for a preferred alternative based on the criteria and the weighting of the criteria, which is not entirely objective and cannot be. But it's not to be confused with a preference on DOE's part. It is the protocol for going through this assessment process yields a preferred alternative, and that's what goes forward in the CME. DOE doesn't make the decision, but we're obligated to provide that to NMED. The consent order says you got to do this. And so what NMED receives from DOE is that corrective measures evaluation report that has an identified preferred alternative. But it includes documentation of the analyses of all the alternatives. And so NMED has all of that to consider when they review the report. And based on that, they will come up with a remedial alternative that they believe is the correct selection, and they will write a justification for that preliminary or provisional choice, and that's called the statement of basis, a statement of their basis for that provisional selection. Yes, Jim.
Eric, just a quick question. Is the state involved in any way at this level?
I mean, at this stage in the process?
Yeah, the state of New Mexico.
Not formally.
Not formally.
Not formally.
Informally? Did they come to the table?
I'm not empowered to say.
Okay.
Okay.
Good.
Now, another key point. We are under no requirement to request public comment or participation at this point either. We choose to. We want to, because we find it improves the process. Okay? But, yeah. Okay.
So, if you don't mind, let me take
yes, Mike.
in answering your question. The yellow, you can tell from the coding that he put up there, the yellow are the activities that NMED, that's their scope. But throughout the Department of Energy's investigation work plans, the investigation, we have ongoing engagements with NMED staff and subject matter experts, their supervisors. There are technical working groups that exchange information. For the things that NMED wishes to look at in process, there's an engagement. We have a larger staff when you consider the federal staff and the contractor that NMED does, so we take our cue from them as to what work scope they want to look at in process. It usually ends up being the most significant or visible type work, but they do have a in-process role in engagement throughout the process. I hope that answered your question.
That's absolutely right, Michael. Thank you. So, once NMED has reviewed the CME and made a provisional selection, provisional is my word, but it's descriptive of the process, and they issue their statement of basis, they will issue that statement of basis for public comment, formal public comment, at least a 60-day period. And there's an opportunity for anyone to request a public hearing on the matter. The public hearing is not required in the consent order, it's provided for if requested, all right? So that public comment period takes place and all suggestions, input that NMED, and this is, as Michael said, this is at the NMED part of the process. So they would run the public comment period and resolution of those comments. They would run any public hearing that would be held, and that would become part of the public comment. And then they make a final decision, not that this happens quickly, but they would make a final decision and publish that, okay, based on input from the CME and from the public comment period. Full weight to public comment in their selection of a final remedy. But it is NMED's sole authority and responsibility to make that remedy selection by each project. It's not, you don't look for them to say, well, for these 3 MDEs, we're going to take this approach. It'll be one at a time, because this process is run for each of them individually. You'll see there are a couple of the campaigns that have 2 MDAs in them, but each MDA is individually treated through this CME process. Okay? So a remedy selection is made. All right? Then it's back in our court. We plan the implementation of that final remedy with the technical approach, general design criteria, perhaps early stage design, schedule, cost estimates, that sort of thing. And we issue that implementation plan to NNMCAB for their review and approval. And once approved, we can go into corrective measure implementation. And for a large MDA, that could be a very long lived project, a large excavation project perhaps. It could take years and a lot of money to deliver, but that's the process we would go through. Implementation plan, implementation in the field, and then once done, once it's implemented, not that it would stop because ongoing monitoring would still continue, but the installation, if you will, of whatever's done. Then we issue a report documenting that, and in the process requesting, again, the certificate of completion from the state. Okay. Questions about that process? Yes, Jim.
I'm sorry, but I'm going to ask this. When you talk about you don't have to ask the public, but you do, how often does the public respond and get into making a recommendation to do anything?
I would say every time.
Really?
Yes. We have, it depends on what you mean by the public.
Yeah.
1 or 2 or 3 voices of the public every time, perhaps more. Never zero. We have, I would say, a narrow slice of the public who is deeply involved and interested and will habitually come forward with a response.
Okay, well, one more piece of that, just to satisfy my own curiosity, is at the meeting down at the convention center a while back, that was, I think it was advertised as a public meeting, blah, 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 blah. I sat there and listened to the public, and almost everyone was a well-organized, anti-everything presentation. And I wondered if this was truly the public, or if these groups that stood up and made speeches were anything more than, let's not do nuclear, let's shut down Lanol, pretty high-end stuff. So I was just curious, at what level do you get comments along this process? Because I think it's a very important thing to do. So I promise no more questions. Maybe.
I'm searching for a question in there for me to answer, so I think I'll not search anymore. Okay. I understand the observation you made of that meeting. Yeah.
So I'll take a swing at this one then too. Jim, I think, by the way, Michael McElhan's Department of Energy. We're talking about the public comment period following NNMCAB statement of basis. So during our development, our work up above and below, if there's public engagement, it would be through this body, because you're my advisory body. If I wanted some advice as we went through here and get it, that's how the Department of Energy would engage with the public. When it comes to New Mexico's Environment Department, public comment on that, Jim, I don't know how they would put context to public feedback they get, and I'm not even going to speculate on that, because that would be something that agency would have to look at, and I would assume they would do it similar to me. So let me just say how I address public comment. When we have a public meeting, we welcome comments on everything. When it's dealing with the Citizens Advisory Board, we engage in the EM scope only. And when we have the public comment period, if the public wants to comment on something on NSA, it's a public comment period. We don't shut down the conversation. I have my environmental management cleanup forums every quarter or 4 months, and people are welcome to provide comment as well. I just can't respond to anything on NSA. But I listen to every piece of public feedback that comes in, and carefully consider it to see how I can apply, even if it's not aligned with where the department was going. I would listen to that, look at it, and see, is there something in there I haven't thought about? I presume NMED would have a similar approach, different criteria maybe, but I'm not going to comment. I really can't answer your question as to how NMED would address comments that were outside the scope of the statement of basis because somebody came and wanted to use the public comment period to bring up some other point. I'm sorry, the best I can do for you, sir.
If I could respond to Jim as well, having had to stand in front of outraged public several times in the past, the challenge for NMED is that 200 to 500 energized public people can scream their opposition and, as Jim says, have maybe nothing to do with MDAH, but making plutonium pits. So the risk is that the decision that ends up being done by NNED becomes a political one rather than a practical one. And as the noise goes upwards to the governor's mansion, what signals come back down to the department that's under your control as to the final decision they make. So I'm telling you, it is really difficult to be the person up there receiving this stuff when you have formed a scientific or rational decision about what the proper remedy would be, and 200 other people are saying, take it all out of the ground, you know, so that, I think that's the risk.
If I can, Michael Michelangelo, Department of Energy, if I can kind of wrap up this part of the discussion, the Department of Energy relies upon the expertise, the professional experience of our regulator to manage the public comment period. I've learned in my 2 years here, almost 2 years, gosh, I'm aging myself before I'm aged. I've had discussions with Neelam and with the bureau chief and the division directors on how, you know, some of this process works. They've shared with these things. I'm absolutely confident that they can manage the public comment period, and Neelam has shared with me how when they go to the public comment period, how that relates to, they consider all that and the potential for what they might hear in the statement of basis. As they kind of shared a little bit at a very high level, I have high confidence that they can manage that thing. They've got people, they've got the experience, and at the end of the day, when I turn over the CME report with a recommendation, as the presenter mentioned, the ball's in NMED's court. Then they make a decision. They will make a decision. It's been shared with me, and they take this very seriously. They will only select a remedy that they feel they can defend, because once they make a selection, they've got skin in the game, and that is very important to them. So the public comment part is an important element of their decision making, and although I haven't been here yet, that we've gone through that public comment period for one of our corrective measure evaluations, I'm absolutely confident that they'll manage that, and I have zero inclination to weigh in and try to help them with that, because I would expect my regulator would say, thank you, but we don't need it.
Yeah. So let's give a little context here. These two slides are the foundation of the entire consent order. Everything else is just kind of the ornaments on the Christmas tree, so I'm saying this process is critical. The remaining slides kind of walk you through the ornaments on that Christmas tree. So this is actually more of a workbook for you in the future, a reference in the future. And with that said, I'll remind our speaker that he has half an hour to get through 24 slides at this point in time.
Eric, if I may.
Yes, Elena.
Thank you for just a moment. And I wanted I know we're wrapping this part up, and I want you to go ahead and have the time that you need to move forward, because I enjoy your presentations and they're informative. Also, just to follow up on what Michael said, and in defense of NMED, any decisions they make must be technically and regulatorily defensible. So thank you, Michael, for that extra information. That's all I wanted to add. Please proceed, Eric.
All right. It's like 4. Okay. All right. As Lee promised, we got to walk through the consent order section by section, but we'll not dwell on very many of them. So again, not surprisingly, they have much to do with the judicial standing or the basis of the consent order. I call your attention to Roman numeral 2, the purpose and scope of the consent order. And this is a good, thorough, and I think excellent explanation of why the consent order exists. A framework for actions to implement the regulatory requirements. The regulatory requirements stand in law and the implementing regulations, but the practicality of how it's carried out is what is delineated in the consent order. Establishing an effective structure for accomplishing work on a priority basis, rather than one single item at a time, but as you move front through the volume of work to be done in a general priority basis to get the important things done first, and we'll get to some of those details. With achievable milestones and targets, with the milestones being enforceable. It intends to drive toward, and it does a very good job defining cost-effective work, resulting in measurable environmental cleanup. Minimizing the duplication, we had seen a fair amount of this in the past because of the iterations, the multiple mobilizations in the past, a framework to minimize that duplication of both the work and the documentation. Setting a structure for the establishment of new cleanup campaigns as any needs arise as the milestones, with their own milestones, as we get new information or discoveries as campaigns are completed. To facilitate the cooperation, exchange of information, and participation of the parties to the consent order, that is NMED and DOE. It does set the framework for that. To provide for effective public participation, and we are implementing that fully. And then to define and clarify its relationship with other regulatory requirements, particularly the hazardous waste facility permit, because there's the potential for confusion and overlap, and it does define how the two are distinctly separate in this regard. All right, next slide. Definitions, 2 key definitions I want to call to your attention among the nearly 50 that are in the consent order. SHMOOs and AOCs. And let me say that it's not important for you to understand what each means exactly and what the difference is, because functionally they are equal in importance in the conduct of the consent order work. But a SHMOO is basically where we know we had waste stored there and we suspect there's contamination. An area of concern is, we think there might have been something spilled there. We're not sure. We need to keep it in scope to take a look at. That's basically it between SHMOOs and AOCs. But we use those terms, those acronyms, freely and shamelessly. So please forgive us when we slip into acronymization. Findings of fact and conclusions of law. I think I've seen that in every legal document I've ever seen. Basically setting more of the foundation for why this exists and why it's a good thing. The parties, as you know, are NMED and DOE. It does say that work previously done and called good is not pulled into the consent order. It's left in the past and we're moving forward. Any questions so far? Feel free. I appreciate the conversational nature of this discussion. All right, next slide. Next slide, again. All right, the relationship to the permits. The corrective actions under the consent order are conducted in the consent order except for these new discoveries, post-closure care requirements, the monitoring and long-term monitoring after a final remedy has been installed. That's not under the consent order. Controls that go along with that, implementation of institutional controls, engineering controls, whatever. That once the remedy is installed, care thereafter is out from under the consent order. It's beyond the consent order, because the consent order, once the final remediation has been done that's covered by it, the consent order expires, and we'll see that later. Okay. New discoveries, new created from non-permitted operations. So basically says everything having to do with cleanup is in the consent order except these few things. Okay. Okay. You've heard us talk about the individual permit for stormwater corrective action, the IP permit. These are the mesa top, generally, surface stormwater runoff monitoring sites where we do some engineered controls to make sure we're capturing the runoff and sampling it and evaluating it to ensure that we're not getting runoff from those schmooze and AOCs out into water discharge at the surface. Okay, those are not under the consent order. They are under their own permit, which is held by EPA and locally administered by NMED, but it's not under the consent order. But it is conducted by the same environmental remediation organization at N3B. And there's close cooperation between the IP Surface Water Stormwater Corrective Action Program and the Aggregate Area Soils Cleanup Program, because they have so much interplay and can assist each other in the conduct of their work. And we'll get to talk about that at a near future CAB meeting. Okay. And any schmooze or AOCs where corrective action is not yet complete upon termination of the consent order will revert to the mother permit, the hazardous waste facilities permit under RCRA. How am I doing on time, Lee? Okay. Campaign approach, next slide. This I know is also of interest to the CAB. You've got schmooze and AOCs, and for efficiency and management, we collect them into something we call aggregate areas, just general geographic proximity, typically defined by a watershed area or canyon and feeders, all right? Aggregate areas are then brought together, 4 or 5 at the most, into a campaign of contiguous ones that are then cited in the consent order under Appendix C for general priority treatment in moving forward. And so you got campaigns, aggregate areas, schmooze and AOCs, all right? So the campaigns are the organizational unit under the consent order for establishing priorities. And campaign consists of, as could be seen, one or more projects within an aggregate area, and from start to finish, a project could span multiple years. We have that underway now in the aggregate area program, where it's taken 2, maybe into a 3rd year to get work completed on any one. But we have several going on in parallel, so work is progressing. Tangible, measurable environmental cleanup in a cost-effective manner. I have used campaign approach at other sites, non-DOE sites even, where it just made sense for a remote mobilization to be able to get as much done as possible, sites of multiple, of differing ownership, differing contamination, differing challenges, but get the crew and the material and the equipment to the field in a single field season to get it all done as a campaign. So when I came here and found this in the consent order, I was delighted, because it really makes a lot of sense. Deliverables, and again, the campaigns are defined in Appendix C and in notional priority order, okay, with the letter designation A through Q. Deliverables set forth in Appendix B are either milestones or targets, and we'll get more on that. Milestones for the fiscal year beginning now, and then targets for the next 2 fiscal years. Milestones are enforceable. Targets are a guide to our thinking for the creation of future milestones. Okay. Page 9. Next slide. Okay. The annual planning process, which most commonly brings to mind the Appendix B, but it also includes Appendix A and Appendix C, is a matter of reviewing Appendix A for the status of the schmooze and AOCs. Appendix A is the inventory of 1,400 plus schmooze and AOCs and their status. And that list was improved this year with the addition of some information that makes it a more usable, searchable list. So that's part of the annual planning process. And then Appendix B, a forecast of changes to Appendix B, the milestones, the enforceable milestones, based on progress in the field to date, on new information, on the budget scenario for the coming year. All of that feeds into the DOE's proposal for a new set of milestones for Appendix B, and then NMED is considering that, and then a negotiation takes place, and a final list comes out, and NMED has a public meeting to inform the public on the result. This past year, DOE invited and welcomed public participation in the development of those Appendix B priorities. Okay, after they complete those negotiations, that public meeting, I said that, okay.
Eric, you had 20 minutes.
Oh, thank you. A bonus. Hi, Madam Chairman. Good to see you. All right, next slide. All right, the consent order also talks about the cleanup objectives and cleanup levels, and it defines it in case of human health risk in this manner. And these are based in the risk assessment guidance for site investigation and remediation. Okay. 10 to the minus 5, that's 1 in 100,000 cases of a cancer case developing as a result of exposure to those contaminants. Okay, 1 in 100,000. Okay, for carcinogens, and then a hazard index. And I'm not going to bore you with how the hazard index is developed, but because Patricia did that for me, a hazard index, a composite hazard index of 1 for the non-carcinogens. Okay, and that risk information is used to help make decisions. If either or both of those are met, then the site-related contamination poses an unacceptable risk if it's above those thresholds. And it requires a corrective action, a cleanup, okay? Or if it does not reach that level, and if cleanup has happened and it has now fallen below that level, it sufficiently protects human health and the environment. Or if it never reached that level, no action required based on the risk assessment, okay? But that's embedded in the consent order. We didn't make it up. Okay. Next slide. When we're out in the field digging dirt, we find new things. It's at Los Alamos where discoveries are made. Well, I don't think that's what the sign meant, but it happens often, and we deal with that. And there are mechanisms to add new potential schmooze or AOCs to the population, to the inventory. And if it meets screening levels for further investigation action, we pursue that. If it's not above the soil screening levels, then no further action is taken. Just noted, yeah, we found a little bit of contamination. It wasn't so high that it requires an action per the consent order, all right? Deferred sites. This is kind of an interesting one. Because of the history of this magnificent town, there are contaminated sites underneath buildings that have been built since that contamination was put there. We know it's there. It's on the inventory of schmooze and AOCs, but we don't have access to the site, and so action on that schmoo or AOC is deferred. It remains in Appendix A on the inventory, but is labeled as deferred. And we're alert to any opportunities, because those sites are not all in town sites. Some of them are, most of them are out on the laboratory property. And if they decide to demolish a building or do something new at an area, we get word of that. I mean, hopefully it's formal, direct communication. Sometimes we just have to keep our ear to the ground. And we engage them and look for an opportunity to actually conduct an investigation or remediation for a site that might have a new building put on it, okay? So there's that interplay going on. Those are for deferred sites. Slide 12. Groundwater monitoring. The purpose of groundwater monitoring is multifold. It's certainly to detect whether contamination has reached the aquifer, if it's moving, if there's a threat to any potential receptor, but it largely is a confidence builder and an assurance that things are not creating a problem. But when it is, we have procedures in place to respond to them. But every year we prepare a plan that we affectionately call the IFGIMP, the Interim Facility-Wide Groundwater Monitoring Plan. That plan is really important to NMED. This is the first example Neelam always uses when she hears the criticism that our milestones are too many reports and not enough work. And she says, this one is a very important document to us. It's a plan of how they're going to conduct the groundwater monitoring for the year. We want that to stay a milestone. And she's been steadfast in that. Bless her. So we implement that plan and do extensive groundwater monitoring, like 200 plus wells that we do this for. Some of them have multiple screens in the well. And provide any notifications of a newfound contaminant or increased level. And that's reported promptly to the public database in TELUS. And that'll be mentioned here in a moment too. And as work is accomplished on the surface of the ground, it may call for alterations in our approach in the groundwater monitoring, either additions or going to a new well, whatever, but that's what that third bullet means. And then once the consent order is done, groundwater monitoring will continue, and it'll be shifted back under the hazardous waste facilities permit. Next slide. Okay, these boxes are again from the content of the consent order. I pulled this material up front to talk about the corrective action process, but here it is again with some detailed descriptions of each. So the investigation work plan details what we're going to do. Facility investigation is doing it, and the investigation report is, yep, we did it, and here's what we found, and here's the risk assessment. Can we please have a certificate of completion? The next item has nothing whatsoever to do with that directly. Areas of contamination. This is an operating flexibility given to a cleanup contractor to conduct remediation among SHMOOs and AOCs where RCRA rules might prevent me from moving this contaminated soil or this overburden over here in order to work here. And so it gives us freedom to establish an area of concern, area of contamination rather, around a larger footprint than we typically would under the rules, in order to accomplish the work in a practical way. That's what area of contamination is about. Next slide. Oh, excuse me, and there were a couple examples there. MDA back in the early 2000s, and then the corrugated metal pipes retrieval project has an area of contamination approval. Interim measures. These are important. The chromium contamination project is operating under an interim measures authority from NMED, and that is to reduce or prevent migration of contaminants while we're in the process of coming up with what the long-term final remedy ought to be. So we're deeply into that in chromium. We had a shorter lived one at MDAL in dealing with the soil, the VOC contamination in the soils. A soil vapor extraction process was implemented successfully to pull product out of there, and later this year we'll be resuming some intermittent soil vapor extraction at the urging of the public, the stakeholders, and NMED. Emergency measures are dealt with in the consent order. They are what the word implies, where you find something you really got to get after and clean it up, and it just kind of, you stay barely ahead of the paperwork. And it says here, you know, the requirements sequencing are intended to facilitate rapid response there. All right, next slide. All right, more on the corrective measures process. The CME evaluation, again, we talked about this, how the CME is conducted, and then the report documents that review of alternatives. Statement of basis selection. Okay, the statement of basis is prepared on the basis of the CME and the preceding investigation reports, and it describes their basis for that selection. The public comment period is designed to get other input, at least 60 days public comment with an opportunity for a hearing, as I said, and then they make their final remedy and publish that based on all of the foregoing, including public comment. Okay, next slide. And then the corrective measures implementation, as I said, it says detailed plans for design. Based on conversations we've had with NMED, it's likely we'll be including some early design elements in the corrective measure, the implementation plan, not wait for the actual implementation to start design. And you need some design work done in order to estimate costs. So, and then after it's all done, the report. Okay. Accelerated corrective action is different from emergency or interim. It's just you can get after it more quickly. Using presumptive remedies that are conservative in nature and where there's a clear approach you need to take, and no need to prepare a corrective measures evaluation. Just do it. Clean closure, for instance. And it gives DOE the freedom to conduct work ahead of NMED approval at risk in the sense of if NMED excuse me, is not satisfied with the result, they may require additional work by DOE. And then the certificate of completion. Oh, next slide. Sorry, guys.
10 minutes, Eric.
Thank you. We're there. All right. The certificate of completion has to be issued for each individual SHMU or AOC. And as I said, there's more than 1,400 of them altogether, including the deferred sites. To date, 387 COCs have been approved by NMED. Okay. Another 207 are in front of NMED for approval with our justification for that. And so that leaves 677 yet to be done, and many of those are under investigation right now in the field, in the SOILS program. Now, and then another 134 deferred for the total population of 1,405. And approved COCs are mostly without controls, but a good share are with controls. Where the residential land site use scenario risk requirement cannot be met, but industrial or construction can. For industrial reuse on laboratory property, that's the appropriate approach to take, but it is not a COC without controls. It has to have controls of access, site use, that sort of thing. Okay, the dams. These are the one individual from both of the parties to the consent order who are assigned the responsibility to oversee the interaction and conduct of the work. They meet regularly and they participate in the annual planning process for the appendices A, B, and C revisions. The current dam reports to Mr. Bishop, his organization, the DOE dam. So it's at a good working level where the individual has the time to commit to that relationship. Section 23, everybody agrees to work well together for preparation, review, and comment on documents. Notification submission, typical administrative stuff, dispute resolution with an escalating approach to that framework. Quality assurance, data management, that we're required to use industry and DOE standards for conduct of laboratory analyses of our samples, using EPA practices and procedures. And we're required to maintain the public access database that you heard about. We would anyway, but the consent order has codified that. And then we keep people notified, or we add people to the notification list when there are changes or new documents posted, so they can stay linked in. No pun intended. NMED has access to the Lano site with reasonable notice and in accordance with security requirements to conduct their oversight work for inspections, getting their own samples. They don't just take split samples with ours, they take their own samples as well, and to view and copy documents. DOE is required to notify NMED of field sampling activities at least 15 days prior to their going to the field, and also 15 days prior notice before implementing any of those plans you saw up there that require NMED approval. Okay. We're required to maintain reading rooms, hard copy and electronic public reading room. Milestone extension. Oh, next slide. There we go. One more. Okay. If a milestone encounters a problem that calls for an extension, say an equipment failure or some act of God, some natural occurrence, If there's good cause and a timely request is made, NMED is obligated to consider it within 15 days. And I'd say for the most part, they've taken a reasonable approach to that. So, retention of records, 10 years past the termination of the consent order. So hard copies of the administrative record in storage for that long. All right, this is an interesting point of funding. It says in the consent order the expectation is the DOE's obligations are going to be paid for by congressional appropriations, which I think the silent message is don't expect the state to pay for any part of this. That's not going to happen. Well, we know that, but they felt the need to say that, and I get that. And DOE is to take necessary steps and best efforts to obtain timely funding to meet its obligations under the consent order, and they're doing that. Federal Anti-Deficiency Act is an interesting critter. It puts a federal employee, federal government employee, not the contractor, the federal government employee, at risk for jail time for spending more money than they're appropriated. If you obligate to a subcontractor or a vendor more money than you have, you can go to jail for that. So they do a really good job of avoiding that. And the consent order says we're not going to put you in that position. And then, interestingly, NMED inserted here the right to revise or their review times or any other time commitments due to the state of New Mexico's funding limitations. Not for any other reasons, just for funding limitations. I haven't heard them call on that yet, but that's in there. Let's see. And compliance with laws. Nothing in the consent order and nothing in NMED does is going to make DOE be non-compliant with other state or federal requirements. Okay. Next slide, force majeure. I think most of us know what that is. Events or actions beyond the control of the parties that call for an adjustment to schedule and expectations. The Cerro Pelado fire last year is an example of that, impacting the drilling of one of our wells. And there have been others over the years. Consent order can be modified by agreement of the parties, as most any contract can. Now, this is important. If there's a proposed modification to the consent order that could affect the priorities or interests of any municipality, county, or pueblo that shares a common, the words are border, but proximity with Lanel, as well as the 4 Accord pueblos, which don't necessarily have that close proximity, then NMED must confer with the appropriate representatives of such municipality, county, or pueblo and allow them to comment on the proposed modifications, and those comments will be considered when modifying the consent order. Okay? So I think that's an important outreach there. Covenant not to sue, that's pretty common. All right, next page. Stipulated penalties. If DOE fails to meet a milestone that is not extended, they are subject to financial penalties as defined in the consent order. And they'll only be liable for stipulated penalties for failure to meet a milestone, for no other reason within the consent order. And then it shows the amount that they're liable. For the first month, it's $2,000 a day, and thereafter, $4,000 a day cumulative. And if a milestone is extended beyond the current fiscal year, it's no longer a milestone. Recall the annual planning process requires a resetting of those Appendix B milestones each new fiscal year. So what's passed is passed. And if a milestone was extended beyond the end of that fiscal year, it is no longer a milestone. It has to be reconsidered in the next set. I keep looking at you, Jim. You're just across the room from me there. I don't expect you to be a reason why we'd miss a milestone. No. Okay, the consent order ends when the work is done. And no calendar term attached to it. It's just keep on keeping on. Effective date. All right, next slide. So in addition to the body of the consent order, we have these appendices. We've talked about 3 of them frequently. The Appendix A is the inventory of SHMOOs and AOCs and their status. Appendix B is the annually modified set of milestones for the current or the starting fiscal year, and then the targets for the subsequent 2 years. And only the milestones in that first year are enforceable. Appendix C is the descriptions of the campaigns. They have not fundamentally changed from the establishment of the consent order, nor have their sequencing been changed. One has been finished. A couple others are finished as far as we can right now, and the next slide will give you the inventory, but don't flip it yet. Appendix D is the description of the guidelines for review times by NMED and response times by DOE to important documents. CME report, for instance, calls for an NMED review time of 280 days. And then once we get their response, DOE has a guideline of 150 days to revise and respond. And all, work plans, investigation reports, certificates of completion, all these are on the list with differing times that were negotiated then. But as has become clear, and I think I did say this, NMED shows a good deal of flexibility in the time that they take it to do a thorough job. But that's what's in Appendix D. Appendix E, guidance to us for reporting in document formats, and then field activities are described in Appendix F that give NMED's guidance on how to do those. Questions to this point?
So Eric, let's hold questions till after the break, and
Okay.
I think
Next
we're going to
slide.
have a little chunk of time during the post-public comment period that we can get a few questions in.
Okay, next slide. These are the campaigns that are in Appendix C, but we grouped them in their current status. As I said, 1 is completed, 11 are in progress, so it's not like we do just one after the other. We have a wide front of work moving forward. And then there are 5 campaigns not started, not necessarily by choice. For instance, the chromium final remedy and the RDX remedy must follow the other campaigns, which are for interim measures for chromium and characterization for both. So it's a natural progression from one to the other there. And then Sandia Canyon and Upper Water Watershed campaigns are scheduled to begin, I think, by the end of next fiscal year. So we'll be getting after those. The AB MDA area we haven't yet started, but it's in our option period baseline to get started on that. So that's the overview of the consent order. It's important to understand that the consent order does not cover all of EMLA's responsibilities or N3B's work. Nominally half the work is radioactive waste management and disposition, retrieval and disposition, the CH True organization and program. So that remaining other nominal half, some of the environmental remediation scope is not under the consent order. 2 things that come to mind are decontamination and demolition of radiologically contaminated buildings is not under the consent order. And as I mentioned, the individual permit for stormwater corrective action is under an EPA permit, not subject to the consent order. So half of EMLA's work is not under it, and a good share of the environmental remediation work is not. But what drives the bulk of the cleanup, though, is the consent order. Annually, we revise the Appendix B milestones, but not all of the work under the consent order is tied to a milestone. The Appendix B milestones do not define the work plan. They are markers of performance accountability on the important stuff that we're doing, okay? The priorities are generally set in Appendix C. Those priorities flow through to our contract and our baseline. That is our work plan. And then the process of setting Appendix B milestones is to identify agreeable to both sides, mileposts of work accomplishment to hold DOE and N3B accountable going forward. And we're happy to do that.
Oh, I was gonna, thank you for your presentation.
That was
Okay.
timely. Very good.
Okay, thank you. We will now take a break and return at 3 o'clock. Thank you very much for the information, Eric. And we will take questions after public comment. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Eric.
Thanks for your help. Thank you for accommodating portability.
Sir. Most certainly. I don't think I'm gonna try to do those measurements right now. Yeah. So I'm gonna back up this here. Zoom here. Oh. There we go. And our presentation is still up, so let's put a cam up for those folks so they can see us. And then let's put that cam back out just bottom of the room. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna try to get those measurements right at this moment. If you don't mind, when we're done, after we load out. Yeah. It'll take me 5 minutes to go over there and do it. Look, we got the keys to the public. Try, because now if I don't have this, I can download it and probably do that. Hello, everybody online. So yeah, we have switched to A, and it's got 640 left on it.
Because like it was like looking at me and it said it was still on B.
The first time that happened to me, I was sitting there just like watching it like hot, and just watching the countdown timer, and I had another part to put into B ready to go in case it didn't work. I was just like, okay, please switch, please switch, please switch.
It took me a while for it to get there, but it did.
So our microphones, we have 8 hours, 7 hours, 8 hours, 4.5 hours on the podium. We're great. Okay, so let's see if I can see how fast I can. Okay, let's see if I can do. I was having a hard time earlier. Okay, so I have the NNMCAB down here. Yeah, so when I have the NNMCAB logo here. Okay, I have an idea. New file. I want it to be new. Cool. Let's see if this works. 480. Wait, no, it should be a square.
Hey, that's not too bad.
480. 275. Hey, there we go. I'm rolling. Oh no, but it resized it. I don't want to do it like that. So I know what I'm doing now. I would actually have like, all right, I'm gonna get this. There we go. So we have it square within this. Now we get all of this.
Hello, it's now 3 o'clock.
Okay, so we don't need anything else. This is there's no more presentation. They know they promised these people that we had okay, so I missed my opportunity to try to put this logo on the mic before they start. Image size. Export, export, export,
All right, folks, we need to respect the public comment period.
Thank you, Lee. At this time, we do not have anybody signed up for public comment, but do we have anybody online that wishes to participate in the public comment?
I would.
Scott Kovac.
Yes.
You may proceed, Scott.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the CAB, for working on these complicated problems. I want to thank you for this comment period too, but you know, you mentioned that you're having a public outreach committee kind of getting started here, and to me, I find it interesting that the CAB goes to some length to have public comments at a certain time. I mean, this is probably required. But then on the other side, I find it hard to find out what the CAB does with the public comments. I mean, best I can tell, there's no public record of any of these public comments. I mean, if you look at the minutes from April that the public gets, there's no minutes included. And so it's just hard for the public to understand where these are going. I mean, you know, the minutes are not in the packet. And then in addition to that, public questions are not answered and public comments are not replied to. And in addition to that, the public has no input into the recommendations. So I would just respectfully request that we kind of look at some of these questions and maybe we can deal with it in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, Scott. We will take note of it. Do we have anybody else for public comment? If we do not, we will resume and take questions from Erich's presentation.
Stuart Barker.
Okay, and once Erich is in place, Mark, you may ask your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have 3 questions on your presentation. On page 10, it talks about the NNMCAB has established target risk levels, and it only mentions cancer. So are there any, this may be a question more to Lee and Michael, what about risk levels due to explosives like RDX or MDAH? There's no risk assessment done to anything except for cancer?
There are. The hazard index is for contaminants that are non-carcinogenic, and that's the aggregate hazard index totaling 1 that Patricia Wald-Hopkins went into some detail to explain at the March meeting, and we could go back over that if you like.
Okay, yeah. My teacher here pointed that out to me, right? Then on page 20, it says that NNMCAB review can be extended based on, is related to funding. But there was smirking going on. What about staff availability? It's my understanding they're understaffed and having trouble getting staff, mostly because you hire them away, but nevertheless. So is it, you know, we're way behind. We're several years, and some of their reviews. So is that a that's not a funding issue necessarily. They have to do with staff.
So the two are hand in hand to a degree, but the state of New Mexico, if they want to declare that as part of one of the conditions, they would need to formally do that, and we haven't received any formal notification that due to limitations of funding, they don't have sufficient staff to do the reviews. So it's kind of one of those things, we can't assume it, that we need to have something a little bit more than a discussion in a meeting. They need to declare it under the consent order in writing to us that they're going to have to extend some of the review times due to limitations of funding and availability, and that causes availability of staffing shortages is the appropriate way to do that, and they have not.
A little bit duplicitous on their part because the positions are funded, just not filled.
Right.
Okay, then on page...
And if I may, I want to point out for the record, N3B has not hired away NMD staff.
Okay. Flannel has.
I cannot speak for our partners across the
Yes.
bridge.
Okay, so then on page 22, it talks about fines, but the fines are being levied against DOE, but DOE is not doing the work, and 3B is. So if it is delayed due to N3B, and DOE has to pay the fine, are they reimbursed?
So there's a little deeper than that, in that, first of all, N3B is not party to the consent order. Only the Department of Energy and the Hazardous Waste Bureau are parties to the consent order, so they execute it on our behalf. But some of the fines and penalties you may have heard about in the newspaper were not necessarily consent order fines. Eric talked a little bit about we do other work. So there's a RCRA permit, a Resource Recovery Act hazardous waste permit at the lab that it's a 4-party permit with NNSA, DOE-EM, Triad, and N3B. And so when they do their RCRA inspections across lab-wide, their surprise RCRA inspection every year, there will be fines if we have a non-compliance, notice of non-compliance, and we agree to it, and we'll negotiate those, or N3B, and to the extent practical, if that notice of violation is a result of, let's say, a contractor's, it's solely on them, they could have prevented it, then the department will request that they pay that directly out of their funding. If it's something that they could not have prevented, and it's something that they'd gotten direction from the Department of Energy, and we're both culpable, we'll work between ourselves to figure out how we're going to pay those fines. Is that fair, Eric?
Yes, and there's other language in the consent order that acknowledges that DOE-EM as part of the consent order's responsibility for the conduct of their obligations, fulfillment of their obligations. And they recognize that contractors are hired to do the work, and the statement is made that NMED expects DOE to hold their contractors accountable.
Okay, thank you.
And Stuart, as far as risk, just so for pure transparency, the Department of Energy is under the Atomic Energy Act, and it's not the best thing to say, we're self-regulating for matters of radioactive material. So we share the data with the state of New Mexico, and we publish that data to the public as needed and as required. So in the consent order space, the state of New Mexico doesn't have, quote, jurisdiction in general over radioactive material. So when we talk about risk and cancer risk, there's an SSL, soil screening levels. Those soil screening levels are for RCRA constituents, hazardous waste constituents. And then we have a separate set of criteria that are soil action levels or activity levels that have to do with radioactive material residue. So we share those reports, combined reports with the state of New Mexico, but their jurisdiction only falls under the hazardous waste regulations. If that kind of puts it, I want to make sure we have that in context this afternoon.
Thank you, Stuart and Lee. Mark?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Eric, I gotta say, your distillation of 200 pages of consent order legal terms was really a great presentation. You put a lot of work into it, I can tell.
Thank you, and I must acknowledge staff support in that regard.
Having said that, the one thing I've been struggling with for about 4 years and that I didn't hear or see were the reporting requirements, such as what are the 10-year goals and projections? Are there charts that show progress? Are there tallies that show cost to date and total cost estimated? I didn't hear that, and maybe I missed it, but can you elaborate?
You didn't hear it because it was not expressed in this presentation. That has to do with how we conduct the work, not what is required under the consent order. We do share a great deal of information on planning, expectations, costs, but that does not appear in the consent order as a required activity, which is why you didn't see it on the screen or in that presentation.
And that's why I'm a big proponent of modification of the consent order and would love an opportunity to chime in when that opportunity arises. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. If we have no further questions, we will move on to an update from EMLA Field Office. Michael Michelanis, EMLA Field Manager. Michael?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, good afternoon to all members of the Citizens Advisory Board. Thank the presenters that are here. And I'm also welcome to the members of the public who are attending both physically today and virtually. It's a pleasure to resume and reopen these meetings to both hybrid and in person. And my hope is as we get more and more comfortable with the post-COVID era that we'll see some more members of the public here. I would personally enjoy meeting some that show up and having those engagements. So, again, thank you. For today's update from the field office, I'd like to highlight some recent efforts and project priorities for the Legacy Waste Cleanup Mission. And I think I'll start with Stuart. You asked would like an update and some discussions on the chromium plume. So I'll kind of start with that. And it makes sense to do that because that is the highest priority in my environmental remediation program. Remember, I have two programs, the transuranic waste management and the environmental remediation. The hexavalent chromium plume remediation and characterizing it is the number one priority in that program. And I missed the last meeting with you all. I had to be out of town, but in the last time I spoke with you down in Pewaukee, I shared that we had some direction from the state. We were trying to navigate our way through that, but if we couldn't, we would get direction. We had direction to. We already had direction to not resume or restart 6 of the injection and extraction wells, but that came from the Hazardous Waste Bureau. The Groundwater Quality Bureau in the Water Protection Division of New Mexico Environment Department issued us a direction as well to shut down all injection, which is essentially shut down the interim measure if we didn't do certain things by April 1st, and we weren't able to do that. So we have shut down the interim measure as of March 31st in compliance with the direction that we had from the Groundwater Quality Bureau, and the system remains turned off to this day. As a result of the impasse and nobody, including I think New Mexico's Environment Department, likes having the interim measure off. It doesn't serve anybody's interest to keep the interim measure turned off. We need to be doing something with the plume. And as a result, New Mexico Environment Department, the Department of Energy, and we included Pueblo de San Ildefonso because the operation of the interim measure from a government nation to nation and a government to government engagement level, we began it. We had a 3-party summit in March. The governor from the Pueblo showed up. The 2 division directors from NMED showed up. I was there. And we began a summit of, okay, here's the situation we're in. What are some of the options? And we've had a series of continuing discussions. There's been 4 of them so far, and we're having another one next week where we're putting the options on the table. There was part of the discussion in the very first one was a presentation of I think it was a several hundred-page report that documented, it pulled together a lot of our technical analysis. I know in the previous discussion I shared that we have a model, we have calculations, we have a number of things that give us our basis as to here's our understanding of the plume and what's happening. So we pulled together a summary of that in a documented report, and that was about half of the first summit. And the second half then began to, okay, now that you understand kind of some of what we have and where we're coming from, where do we go from here? So the dialogue continues to be constructive and positive. It would be highly inappropriate to start shared negotiations in public while they're still going on. But we are working to try and find, I'll share the department's objective would be to try to bring what additional actions we can do to address both the Groundwater Quality Bureau's concerns and the Hazardous Waste Bureau's concerns, and reach and satisfy the objectives the department has for our bias for action to be able to move forward with a remedy sooner. So we're open to a number of options and things that we can go beyond what we've already committed, and we're working constructively and collaboratively with the state, and we've included the Pueblo in those discussions too, because since our actions and our decisions, it most directly impacts that nation. And in the spirit of consultation, which I have requirements for, and there's also requirements in the consent order, we felt it was appropriate to have them as a voice on the table, and that's been very constructive as well. The discussions will continue. The interim measure is off, as I said, for now, and it'll remain off as we try to work our way through this, because we don't have an effective way to operate the extraction wells through land application or any other one. I think I know I covered that at a cleanup forum at night, and I think I addressed that somewhat in March when we met in Milwaukee. And while I'm on the chromium plume, I also mentioned in the past that last year we had a problem when we were trying to put a well R73 in. We were unsuccessful in getting that put in place. The casing broke. We submitted a plug and abandonment plan to the Office of the State Engineer, which they approved. They gave us a start date. We had some logistical challenges with that, and I'm very thankful and appreciative of the Office of the State Engineer's consideration. We asked for some extensions. They provided those, and we started the plug and abandonment on March 20th, which was the date that the Office of the State Engineer extended it to. We're making progress completing that plug and abandonment, and we are on schedule to complete that by the end of this month. The N3B, my corporate partner, has done a fact-finding, a causal analysis. In fact, I think they even went to because of the significance of what happened, they went to the more formal root cause analysis approach, identified corrective actions, which will inform the future wells that we install, because each well is a significant investment of the taxpayer's dollar, and we do not take lightly when things like this happen. It happens, but we need to understand what occurred so that I don't get too many chances of putting a $7 million hole in the ground and not address those. If I'm not addressing the causes and trying to prevent them, I'll be a very short-term tenured field office manager. We pulled the casing out, and the actual break in the casing has been extracted, and it's been sent away for independent, if you will, forensic metallurgical analysis to make sure we understand as best we can what occurred. So that was the chromium plumes, my top priority. I'll tell you, it's followed closely by two other environmental remediation priorities. First, I'll talk a little bit about the aggregate area campaign. The aggregate areas, as you heard in the last presentation, agglomerates a number of areas of concerns and SMOOs. This is a high priority for us. These activities were prioritized and are working as a result of a settlement with Nuke Watch, which I think was a very positive thing for the field office because we're making quite a lot of progress in the aggregate areas. We are on track to meet the commitments we made in that settlement agreement. We've got investigations underway in 5 aggregate areas within 2 consent order campaigns. This includes investigation and remediation where required, and closure of 200 solid waste management units in area of concerns. And I think Kim is going to talk a little bit more about that in her part here. Probably tied for number 2, and I don't like ranking them too much because these number 2s are pretty close to number 1 as well, is the Middle DP Road. This is a scope of work. It's not under the consent order. As you saw in some of the provisions, newly discovered work does not automatically fall under the consent order. And we intended to clean this up and not have, and remove the waste, so it still hasn't been added to the consent order. We had completed the cleanup. We have been doing the extended condition to demonstrate that we've got a clean area around this, and we keep doing the extended condition until we get that clean boundary, and then we pull all the soils out in between. We've been chasing a couple of recre metals, and we've got one last one that we've been chasing, arsenic. I think I'm pretty close now to popping the champagne cork. I hope that the next time we meet, I'll be able to say that the extended condition analyses are done, but we still have a few more things that, a couple I's and a couple T's to dot and cross. After that, then we'll be finishing up a written report which goes to New Mexico's Environment Department. Because we've been engaging with them throughout the whole process, and we've been following the agreed upon approaches, and where we've wanted relief or a risk-based approach, they've been involved in every one of those decisions. So I won't speak for what NMED will or will not do as a result of that report, but I'm optimistic that the review of that will be positive for us, because this is something the Los Alamos County is extremely interested in, and that they've told us it's a priority. And honestly, it's because we keep discovering things, and we want a clean certificate of compliance of closure at the end. We've continued that extended condition sampling until we can demonstrate that we've cleaned everything up, and it gives the county something that doesn't have a restriction on it that my regulator would impose on trying to close it. So I think we're getting close to the end of that. I've said that to the county a couple times and keep getting surprised. I probably shouldn't even have said that today, because I may have just jinxed myself. But that remains a very high priority, because it's a priority for the county. I also want to talk a little bit about a NEPA environmental assessment on May 8th and 9th. The field office conducted 2 meetings to initiate a public scoping period for the NEPA for a NEPA environmental assessment that we're doing. This is to cover the interim measure, the NEPA coverage that we have for operation of the chromium 6 plume interim measure expires in December. So we needed to renew the NEPA documentation that we have, and we added some additional scope here. As I mentioned, as part of the negotiations with the state, one of the things that I've mentioned in my public meetings, as well as here at the Citizens Advisory Board, the Department of Energy has a bias for action in this case. I would like to move into a final remedy as soon as possible. That's not going to be possible if the state's not going to accept it. I'd just submit a document, probably torque them off, and I will not get a response back, or I'll get a response I probably wouldn't like. So we'll continue to work with it. I am hopeful that I'll be able to, it may be as an all of the above strategy, be able to move forward with a remedy sometime. And instead of, it's the most cost effective if I put the NEPA coverage to include the, if you will, umbrella, what we think would be the range of possible remedies, so that when, even if it's not near term, if it's a year or 2 away, I don't have to reperform NEPA all over again. So we ought to just do one NEPA action. If I get my Christmas early in, what month this is, May, or if I get my Christmas in June or July, then we've got a head start on the NEPA and there's no delay. If it's done in the future, sometime in the future, currently we have a milestone for putting a corrective measures evaluation in 2025. I still save the government and the taxpayer money, because our NEPA analysis won't have to be, we won't have to do some other NEPA evaluation to go cover the CME as well, because the current NEPA action will cover both. I dwell on that just a little bit because I don't want the CAB or any of the members of the public or even New Mexico's Environment Department, if they're listening to this, to think that we're ramrodding the final remedy through this. The inclusion of it in the NEPA action is an efficiency so that I don't have to reperform a second one sometime in the future. And if we are successful in moving to a final remedy sooner, and I use the word final remedy loosely because if we did go to a remedy, it would have to be a very conservatively designed one, and it would have to be changed as more characterization data came in. But if we are successful in going to a remedy sooner than later, I get a head start on that, and that will not become a critical path item for trying to move forward, submit a CME, and be able to move into a remedy. So just wanted to mention that EA is in progress. A presentation with details on the process and how to submit comments can be viewed on the EM Los Alamos website under Information Center and the sub-thing presentations. The 30-day public scoping period ends on June 6th. And I hope that members of the public and you individually, you're encouraged to participate in this process, because this is where the public gets engaged in what we're doing. The last thing I think I would like to talk about as an update, and I want to reserve the rest of the time for questions and anything, engage with you as you will. We've been doing a lot of talking about, and I've been really excited to start moving out on the strategic vision for the field office, and which you guys piloted for us, and were my guinea pigs. Thank you. The office still remains focused on the development of that with support from our partners N3B and Long & Eckner Associates. We've conducted numerous phase 1 and phase 2 sessions with different engagement groups, with the Pueblos, with elected officials, with representatives from non-government organizations. Have been in that. We've got a lot of feedback from a very diverse set of stakeholders, elected officials, members of the public, et cetera. And I'm really looking forward to trying to get to that next phase, phase 3. But we still have a number of phase 1 and phase 2s, and we added some additional scope. We've added some public forums, town halls, if you will, in 3 of the counties, here in Los Alamos, Rio Arriba, and Santa Fe, because I want to get, in addition to getting individual members in these groups, we want to open it up and try and get the mom and pops across the kitchen table to come to them. I've met with the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis. Frankly, as I said, if anybody stops too long at a stop sign and I'm there, I'm going to come talk to them about the strategic vision. I want them to come to these community forums so that we have one other way to get out and reach and connect with them. The next part will be the hardest part, phase 3, where we take all that feedback and try and put it together into some guiding principles as we put together a strategic vision and revisit some of the end state criteria that were planning assumptions in the document. Long & Eckner Associates just presented the process that they wanted to use for how they'll take that data, put it together. I thought it was a robust process. Now and I was in agreement with this, so now they're working the sausage making of how to make that work and connect up to the data that's out there. So we continue to make good progress, and I'm really excited about the next more difficult, and I'm not deluding myself. I know in some of the feedback we've gotten, I've gotten polar extremes in some of the feedback, and we'll have to navigate our way through there. But I think the tool that my corporate partners have suggested are going to be a good way to help us. I will categorize, process, put it in context so that we can build those guiding principles that will help us put together the strategic vision, and which incorporates all of this feedback from the different groups. Still have to get with the regulators, still have to get with some of the Pueblos, but we're making progress, and I'm really excited to get this done and put something in place like this. I do hope, you know, when I started with the strategic vision, I said typically the government likes to put these plans together where we optimize cost and schedule and safety and things and present and hope that everybody tells us what a great job we did, and usually we don't get that. I really do hope at the end of this process, although everybody, all the groups that are participated, I doubt anybody will get everything that they hope to get, but I'm hoping that at the end of the process, folks will give us some positive feedback that this was constructive and they felt their voice was heard and they understood how things were put together. So we'll see if my hope and dream will actually be achieved. With that, before I turn it over to Kim, if we've got some additional time, I can take some comments or questions from the panel, from the board.
Stephen, did you have a question?
In terms of the chromium plume, Mike, does anybody think we're going to get it all?
Get all the chromium? What do you mean by all before I answer that? You mean take it down to zero?
Or 1 part per billion?
The background in the groundwater without the chromium release is about, that we had historically from the lab, is about 7 parts per billion. That's just naturally occurring. So the state's limit is 50 parts per billion. Where our remediation efforts are focused on is making sure we capture and remediate and extract, and that I'm talking a remedy now, not the interim measure. The portions of the plume that would exceed the limits. So there will be some that is somewhere between background and 50 parts per billion. That's not there. Some of that will get treated as well, but the focus of the remedial actions, the remedies, will be on those parts that exceed the limits, because anything below 50 parts per billion is not harmful. It occurs in nature. Here in this area, background is around 7, but we're targeting our remedies on the parts that exceed the limits. I hope I answered your question.
Well, you did, but I had another oddball question. Has anybody considered as a possible remedy doing nothing and then treating the wells if it gets there?
Well, we don't have wells. You mean doing nothing and letting the plume just go to the wells that we have?
Mike, I think really that we talked about this. I think what Steve is talking about is going to the wells on the Pueblo and treating it as it comes in.
Oh yeah, no.
Receptor point.
I see. No, I do not want to let the plume get across into Pueblo lands. If the plume gets into the aquifer under the Pueblo, I've just now let a release on government property affect the natural resources of a sovereign tribal nation. That would be kind of like Germany letting something happen and getting under France's land. Can you imagine the diplomatic issues with that?
Back to my question about the Supreme Court decision.
Thank you. Am I not on that, or?
Yeah, no.
We're going to treat that on our land.
It just seemed to me that might be a much less costly and easier solution that would be effective to prevent the chromium from reaching those waters that are being used or being consumed by people.
But I think we're on the same page. We're going to try and do that, but on our boundary. We're going to try and we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to, and I'm going to get ahead of myself. I don't want to get ahead of the RCRA CME process, but if pump and treat was the recommended remedy and the selected one by the state, and there's a lot of ifs in there, but let's just pretend in fantasy space that that's what was, we would be putting extraction wells to catch the plume before it gets over. Same kind of thing. Instead of waiting for it to hit the Pueblo property lands, we would put it on the national lab inside our boundary, and the idea would be to vacuum it up, if you will, by extraction, treating it and injecting it back into the aquifer somewhere, because you don't want to just pump and treat and then dump that natural resource. Water is a precious resource in New Mexico, and just dumping it to the surface waters would not be, I can imagine there would be some folks who are very concerned about water rights complaining about that. I hope I answered your question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Online, we have Elena that has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Michael. Just to go back to clarify a point for the public, when you said 50 parts per trillion, or billion?
It's a billion.
Billion, thank you, of acceptable, that's the limit for chromium. Did you mean chromium 6 or chromium 3?
No, thank you for that clarification, Lee. And in fact, my very first cleanup forum, Anna Hansen pointed out to me, and I've tried to be very clear that, because I don't want it to be misleading when I say chromium, it is chromium 6. The state's limit is 50 parts per billion. The Environmental Protection Agency has a national limit of 100 parts per billion, but New Mexico standards are more conservative, and those are the ones that we comply with. And yes, these are chromium 6. Thank you for clarifying that for me, Elaine, because I do not want to mislead members of the public or anybody that might be listening to this.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Jim?
Michael, thanks for everything you're doing. I don't expect you to comment on this. I'm just going to make a personal comment. Given the state of the political tomfoolery in our country today, I hope that there isn't even an ounce of political tomfoolery in what we're trying to get done with the plume. In other words, we've got one group on one side, one group or another. It feels a little strange to me, so I just want to comment on that and don't expect you to. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your sensitivity, because as a senior executive, federal official, I have to be absolutely apolitical. I am paid not to take side in politics, and the Hatch Act, in fact, has some pretty severe and draconian consequences for federal officials that become political, and they are even more significant for senior executives. The restrictions are tighter. I will tell you, though, in my experience in this, politics is not playing into this. This is, in terms of left, right, or any other political groups, there are different perspectives, there are different thoughts and feelings on it, but that's not political in nature, in my personal opinion.
Thank you. Stuart?
Different subject. Have the general's tanks been pumped out?
I'll ask Lee to expand that they were historically pumped out to where there were small residues and some sediments left in it, but Lee, why don't you help me with that?
Yeah, I was here probably 12 years ago when we did a remote entry with detection equipment in there. So there are no liquids, free liquids still in the tanks. There's nothing leaking into the tanks. Right now it's what we would typically call a heel, is in the low spot in the tank, a solidified, semi-solid perhaps material, but there's limited quantity. So the material that was in the general's tanks that was stored there, and general's tanks is referred to General Groves statues out front. Plutonium was the most precious material in the world at the time as far as the U.S. was concerned. We want to recover as much as possible because it's a man-made element that we needed for the Cold War activities. So that material has been pumped down. Those tanks are essentially empty. Now we just need to get the residual heel out and finish the job as far as removing those tanks.
Well, my confusion comes because when we had a tour there about 18 months ago, the person describing what was going out there led me to believe that they were still full of stuff. And then we read about Hartford boasting about how they're cleaning their tanks out. So I'm literally confused about what the status was. And in a recent presentation to CAB, then I got the feeling that they had been.
They are. Now, those come from Building 257, the last standing facility out at TA21, which is a wastewater treatment plant. We're working very hard right now to prepare a plan to enter that building, do the characterization so we understand if there is any residual liquids left in that system and what hazard they may represent before we go in and start decommissioning and demolishing that last facility.
Is there a schedule where that can, Anne is anxious to build apartments on there, I think. So when is that building going to come down, the tanks removed, and when is Los Alamos County going to get it?
Erich did a great job at Nature and Extent today. So the first step is to go in and do the nature and extent, the sampling this summer, and then we'll be able to build a schedule around that as to what it's going to take to actually do that work, if that's okay, Mike?
Yeah, and let me, a little more detail. I mentioned this in a previous CAB meeting. It was around 2020. I was on the detail up in headquarters when this occurred prior to my arrival out here. N3B was getting ready to do the deactivation, decontamination in building 257. And they grabbed some samples that had higher than expected contamination. And in fact, it was high enough that there was concern that the hazard category of the facility, the hazard category dictates what level of nuclear safety requirements apply. With the wastewater treatment that was dealing with residual levels of plutonium that had been flushed in the past, the building had been below hazard category 3, which means the nuclear safety rule and the nuclear safety requirements were not applicable. But these sample results showed, hey, if you did this in larger volumes as some of the tanks and volumes of piping have, this could be a problem. So the work had to be stopped. We had to put together a safety basis to allow us to continue to do characterization and try to understand, okay, what do we really have out there? So we had to kind of step back from going right into D&D into, now we have to go into characterization to see what we have. We have to put together a safety basis. I have what's called a justification for continued operations. It's part of our nuclear safety rule. Those are supposed to be temporary nuclear safety documents. My corporate partners are building a documented safety analysis, which is what the nuclear safety rule requires to allow us to continue to go into the D&D and finish the characterization. First, we have to characterize. When we understand it and we make sure that the nuclear safety controls and analysis bounds and protects the workers, the public, and the environment, we'll go into the D&D phase of it, and then moving further into the cleaning up the areas of concern, the SMOOs that are there, addressing the material disposal areas, et cetera, like that. Some of the characterization and I believe the D&D part of it are in the option period 1 that we just awarded to N3B, but it does extend into the next option period. It's not a fast process to go do all these things, because the one thing I do not want to do is to push my corporate partner any faster than we can go to assure safety of the workers and the public. I hope that answers your question, Stuart.
So we have just a couple of minutes before Kim's time. We have an event coming in right after us, so we need to keep on schedule. So,
Madam Chair, you can pick what you want. I will be here to the end of the day, so if we don't get all the questions answered, I'm happy to engage with you individually afterwards to answer any questions you might have on this. I appreciate the fact that there's a little bit of a time limit here, but I'll be here all day. Try the veal.
Okay, do we have a quick question? And then, okay, Mark, quick question.
I'm always good at quick questions, and thank you, Michael. Michael, we really appreciate your frankness and I think your intended legacy of transparency. I want to be upfront about that. It really is great. The two questions I have is on the $70 million lessons learned on the failed well. When do you think? 7. Oh, 7.
Yeah, not 7.
I take that back. 7.
Drop a digit.
Got 10 more to go.
Drop a digit.
When do you think that result will happen, and will you present it, or do we have to ask?
In fact, I've had some requests for the causal analysis. I've not released the causal analysis publicly because the Office of Enforcement is looking into some of this, and I do not want to release one causal analysis while the Department of Energy, which is an element of it independent of the field office and the Office of Environmental Management, is conducting another investigation. So I'm holding off on releasing any of that publicly, but we're implementing what we have because I'm confident that my contractor's done a good job. It's just before we go public with things, we want to see what, as Paul Harvey would say, the rest of the story is.
And part of this, I don't know when to ask things, and I don't want to be repetitive.
I'll tell you when we're done.
Thank you for that. And the other one has to do with the consent order and key changes to it. I know there's litigation. I know there's changes happening. Will you tell us when that's happening, or should we start working on a recommendation now?
That's what my updates are for.
Okay.
I will tell you when key things move forward. That's the hallmark of my my legacy that I want to leave here. And yes, when I can speak to what's happening with the consent order litigation beyond, yes, we're working it, you will know that.
Thank you.
Hey, so real quick, Mark, two things. Look at Appendix A, B, and C. We've updated those significantly and cleaned them up quite a bit, thanks to our legal team back at EMLA. And as far as the R73, they pulled that casing. That casing came out on a Sunday. I got word Monday morning that it was under what we call a chain of custody for evidentiary purposes. And before my QA team could get out there to verify that chain of custody, it had already been shipped to the laboratory for analysis. So I'll give Kim's team and her subcontractors props on handling that expeditiously.
Thank you. We'll have one last question from Roger, then we'll move on to Kim. Thank you.
Yeah, my name's Roger, and my quick question is, the liquid that was pumped from the governor's tanks, is that transuranic waste as a liquid? And then my question about the solids, or the sludge that may be left, does that get handled as transuranic waste?
The answer is it'll depend. The definition of transuranic waste is a certain amount of, and I don't remember verbatim, a certain amount of transuranics per the mass of the whole thing. So whether the liquids in the tank at the time would have met the definition of transuranic, I don't know. You'd have to look at the remains. As we get in and sample it and characterize it, I'm hopeful that as we package it and put it into disposal, that we can do it below transuranic waste. That means it would be mixed, or it'd be low-level waste or mixed low-level waste, because there will be some logistical things if I'm creating transuranic waste over there, but it's not been characterized and put into the land. I'll have some challenges because typically any transuranic waste that's shipped on public roads is going to WIP. So my characterization stuff is about 7 miles that way, and DP Road is 1.5 miles that way. So if I create transuranic waste, my concern is if I create transuranic waste as I do the cleanup in there, we're going to have to look at how do I transport the materials then safely, protective of the public, across the roads. In the past, the Department of Energy has done that by closing down the roads and putting controls on how we ship it. But my preference would be to, as we clean it up, to put it in a form that's not transuranic waste. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you again for all the questions. Thank you, Michael. I know that's a lot to cover: policy, technical, political. It's a lot. So thank you for answering the questions. Also, Lee, for your support too. We will now
try to be a jack of all trades and a master of absolutely none. Thank you. I'm going to step out for a couple calls, but I'll be back again.
Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to update and look ahead from N3B with Kim Lieback, President and General Manager of N3B.
Good afternoon. We've already covered a lot of waterfront here with Erich's presentation on the consent order and Michael's update, but I'd like to point out a few odds and ends as we continue our dialogue. When we talk about protecting water quality, we talked about R73, but to Mark's point on looking at some of the documentation, we did ship some of those samples off-site for an independent laboratory analysis, and although we did a root cause analysis on what we knew at the time on R73, the laboratory could give us information that we don't know about, and so we want to reserve the right to go back and look at our root cause once we get the lab analysis back on those segments, and so we can go from there. But just to try and get a more complete picture of what happened on R73. We have already submitted two water-related consent order milestones to the New Mexico Environment Department, and those were for wells R79 and R80. We do have 3 upcoming consent order milestones for this fiscal year for water, which one is, Eric mentioned the IFGIMP, which is a groundwater monitoring plan. You saw that in his presentation. Another one is a chromium report, which is due at the end of June. And then we have at September 21st, we have hopefully starting on well R76, and we will notify NMED of hopefully drilling that R76 well and notify them per the consent order commitment. When I talked to you all at Cities of Gold, I mentioned in the springtime, it's the time we start activating our water samplers, and these are to the tune of, you know, low hundreds of samplers that we have all over the laboratory site. And so we have activated a couple of hundred of those samplers. When we talk about cleaning up the soil and the land, Eric mentioned a couple of the campaigns we have in the consent order, which are Southern External Boundary and Pajarito Watershed Campaign. And both of these campaigns cover very large areas on the laboratory, and we subdivide them into projects. And so we are continuing to work on Southern External Boundary Campaign, and our laboratory parlance there is North Ancho Canyon aggregate area and Patrillo and Fence Canyon aggregate area. And then if you think about Pajarito Watershed, we have it broken down into 2 mile, 3 mile, and Starmer Upper Pajarito. So lots of work going on in those areas. They're very large areas. They require buku sampling at each of those subset areas, and so we go out and take those samples, prepare them, send them off site, get the results, look at what the results tell us, and that helps us guide our investigations. So a large area there that we are working on in the aggregate areas. And the aggregate areas are a critical part of us protecting water supply, because those sometimes contaminants or bad actors are in the ground. We talked at Cities of Gold about material disposal area H, and so that CME report is due to New Mexico Environment Department at the end of September. And then earlier in the year, we completed material disposal area L, deliverable of the consent order milestone for our fiscal year list that we agreed to with New Mexico Environment Department. As far as our 30 to 60 day look ahead for water and aggregate areas, I want to go back to Stuart's comment on the general's tanks. We do not have that in our 30 to 60 day look ahead because it's very complicated, but we do hope to start doing some sampling over there very soon. Michael described some of the intricacies we've been involved in with finding higher than expected contamination and what have you. So we haven't forgotten. We want to do that work. It's just not ready for to be in the queue yet. So we hope to complete the R73 plug and abandonment, and we are actively working on that. We hope to complete the Middle DP Road field work, and then besides the IFGIMP and the chromium report, we also have deliverables on material disposal alpha and material disposal tango, MDAs A and T, and then we owe New Mexico Environment Department a report on 3 mile, and so lots to do coming up in the environmental remediation area. If we shift gears for a moment and talk about some of our waste projects, we are preparing this week our 49th transuranic waste shipment to WIP. I think in April I talked to you about we're doing very well on our transuranic waste goals and our mixed waste and low-level waste shipping goals. We are on the cusp of resuming a campaign in our waste area where we retrieve corrugated metal pipes. I was out there most of the morning working with the team, trying to get everything lined up so we can get that activity resumed. And then once we resume those once we exhume, once we resume the activity and exhume the corrugated metal pipes that have solidified waste in them, we plan to size reduce them so we can ship them off to Carlsbad, New Mexico. So those are two activities that we plan to get going in the next 30 to 60 days. We will continue doing our waste shipments, and we are currently working in 2 of our 3 processing areas, Building 412 and Building 231, and then the size reduction of those corrugated metal pipes will occur in our 3rd processing area. And in our spare time, we're working on some of the dome reskinning. If you're familiar with those domes, you can see that 4-pack when you're down towards White Rock. Those dome skins, we plan for a 10 to 20 year life on those skins, and so we have a contract with a subcontractor who comes up, and we're currently working Dome 49, and then once we finish 49, we have another repair to make, and after that repair is made, we'll move to the next dome. So Eric talked about in the consent order realm of things, we are working simultaneously on 11 of those campaigns, 11 of the 17. We're also doing waste shipping and processing, with more to come in the next 30 to 60 days. With that, I will pause there and see if we have any questions or comments from the group. Stuart.
Oh. Hello, we
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm
no,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm
We
sorry.
have a question from Sterling online.
Apologies.
Hi, this is Sterling Grogan. Tim, I was stunned to hear you refer to Cities of Gold. Is there some involvement? Is there some waste at Cities of Gold? What was?
No, sir.
I did not understand what you said about Cities of Gold.
I
Thank you.
apologize. That's where we had our last CAB meeting in April. Apologies if I was unclear there, but this group met at Cities of Gold on April 19th. So I said when I was talking to the group last and giving an update, that was my reference there. Apologies if I was not clear. No waste that I know of at Cities of Gold.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Kim, for the clarification there. Stuart?
Remind me, in terms of your water sampling, are you also sampling, people in charge of sampling the stormwater runoff down the canyons?
Yes, we are. We do.
And has that started?
So some of that
since we had a monsoon last week.
So a lot of our sampling is contingent on flow. And so the answer is yes, but sometimes we can sample more than others.
Okay, well, we had a big presentation about a year ago from Lee on this, and you got the gauging station back in operation.
Yes. That
triggers the flow, and my understanding is that when that's triggered, lab team goes out, takes samples. Santa Fe is encouraged to drink the water. No, encouraged not to drink the water. But so, again, has that started?
Yes.
Okay. And so,
if I mean, if the
Who gets
our
notified?
our sampling has started, and you had several things in your comment there. We haven't had to respond in a way that people wouldn't drink the water.
Okay, so I guess there's some formal notification when a week after the water's gone down there, you get the lab results and it says, oh my God, don't drink the water. What is that process by which the public might be notified?
We submit our samples, we get results, but we have not seen a response like that, and Lee can correct me if I'm wrong, since, I don't know, I think it's been quite a while.
No, it's the individual permit, the IP permit with EPA and the state of New Mexico. We sample the waters, they pass, and you're right, we can't predictively tell people, whoa, don't drink the water, but all the drainages are going into the Rio, and if there's an exceedance for whatever reason, like let's say a good example is maybe copper. Copper's naturally occurring. Copper is an aquatic toxin, not a human toxin. So if we exceeded the copper limits by a certain level, we would make that notification in our reporting.
But I think he was,
that was
also
a
talking
huge
about
issue
maybe
several
a
years
no-drink
ago.
situation,
Yeah,
which
no.
I'm not aware of in the last.
No, what we do is the telemetry from that one gauging station you're talking about. If you remember on the tour, we talked about it. There's literally an antenna on top of Santa Fe Baldy, so we have to have line of sight telemetry. So we shoot any positive flow indications up out of the canyon, across to Santa Fe Baldy, can't make this up, right? And then down to the Buckman facility. And the Buckman facility, based on the water flows, will decide if they want to close the gates as far as that intake and switch over the well. More likely than not, they would close the gates due to the turbidity of the water, just the floating stuff in the water, and because it's hard to process. Patricia can certainly talk more about that than I can, but they'd switch over to just from the turbidity in the water, switch over to the wells till that flow passed and the water cleared again. It takes a lot of work to clean up muddy water.
Well, I mean, several of us actually applied for the board and are here because of concern for this specific reason. And a number of years ago, that was what was all in the papers was a concern, particularly the times of the year that was being sampled, the locations where it was being sampled, how it was being sampled, and after the fire, what was the runoff coming down the now glass-covered slopes from the lab. So that whole discussion seems to be obscured now by the chromium plume, plutonium pits, WIP, whatever. But it's I will tell you, still a major concern about any.
And I agree. I would flip that narrative on you if I could politely, Stuart, and say that our surface water sampling is so successful and so diligent and on point. The folks that are running that is one of the, if not the top running program without glitches in N3B's arsenal right now. So we're focusing on where we have a lot of challenges, and surface water, my team oversees that from regulatory compliance, and our IP individual permit is, I think, the most successful program we have going today.
Would the water also depend on the designated uses? If it's recreational, agriculture, or drinking, that would also determine the toxicity level or the concentration levels for the different contaminations?
Yeah, principally we're concerned about the drinking water intake at the Buckman. However, on the tours we went by the weirs, right? Those lovely dammed areas where the sediments, we let sediments come down, settle and settle out. We're expecting to clean out the weir at least once every 10 years. Right now, we're cleaning it out about every 3 years. And to date, we've gotten permission based on sampling of the sediments in those weirs to do canyon side deposition, to put it back on the canyon sides because it's clean enough that it doesn't reflect a hazard to the public in any of the scenarios that Sherilyn provided.
It sounds like we're planning an update in July to the CAB.
Thank you. Thank you. Patricia?
I'm sorry, I believe Mark was ahead of me, but.
Oh, I think you
If
put
you
it
don't
up and
mind.
then you put it on up then.
Oh, okay. Okay, great. Thank you. I did just want to make a comment to our discussion. I did used to give a lot of tours over to the public as well as the community over to the BTD facility. I did want to mention we do have an emergency alert system, so anytime we see any flows larger than half a CFS, we automatically turn off the treatment facility from the river. And we actually also have some cameras to monitor the flow coming down the canyon. And then we also have 5 raw water stations where we take samples. We do have an active chemist on board, always sampling these 5 raw water stations. But to Lee's point, anytime we see any type of flow coming down the hill, we do click on automatically the emergency response system just turns on, and we stop pumping water from the Buckman direct diversion, and we automatically turn on our wells. And we do have operators sitting in the room 24/7. So if anytime they see something coming down the canyon, they do respond to that. Also, did have one question over to Kim. Thank you for your presentation. Regarding the domes, I was just thinking, is there any hazard to the public as you open the dome? And also, is there a way for us to test what's coming out of the dome as you replace the roof?
There is no hazard for replacing the dome or that process. It's a thin fabric, so the domes are quite spacious, and there is a system of air samplers that the laboratory has around, many different stations, and we have those air stations around the domes, and we also have other monitoring devices for some of the domes. So we do have a network of monitoring capability, but the fabric is fairly light, and it's not like a confined cell that can't be penetrated. There's a lot of
It's mainly a weather covering.
right to protect the drums from the external weather hazards. And then if we do processing in any of the facilities, it's typically in a separate either set up inside the dome. So we call them, permacons and these other complicated terms. So for storage, it's typically the dome with the fabric covering to keep the drums protected from the weather. But if we're doing processing, it's typically inside either a more hardened facility or a permacon, or what we call a glove bag, where you can perform that operation inside a specific environment.
Great, awesome. Thank you for that clarification. Just driving by, I'm sure I've sparked my interest. I'm sure other members from the public as well. But thank you for that clarification.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
Thank you. We'll have one last question mark, so we have enough time for Lee to cover his materials. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Be short. This is more of a clarification. So I was up on Mount Baldy, but it may have been because I was there with aluminum poles during an electric storm, and I didn't have time to look at it all. But I know next door, over 10,000 feet, is a steel forest of aerial antennas on Ski Santa Fe. Is it really Mount Baldy that you have the antennas on? I didn't see them.
That's what I've been, Lee Bishop, that's what I've been told over the years.
Okay. I didn't see them. I'll look next time.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and your comments and answering them, Kim. We appreciate it. We will now move on to an update from DDFO, Lee Bishop. Lee?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So I'll be brief here so we can get out on time. Again, we have another, the lodge kind of booked us back to back, so we need to hustle here. So just a preview of the rest of the year. Coming up June 1st, we have the tour at Landell. If you haven't signed up yet and you want to go on the tour, please sign up. 21st, sorry. Then June 28th, we're going to have the special committee meeting to talk about NDAH. The next meeting after that will be July 15th. And then we'll have September in Taos. We will have the chairs meeting in Oak Ridge in October 2nd. The whip tour going down 1,000 feet underground in a salt dome to see the actual whip placement of transuranic waste will be in November 6th and 7th. Be a long couple days, but worth the trip. And then they'll finish our cab season on November 15th at OK Winga. So, and then we'll have, of course, as usual, we'll be dark at Christmas, or not Christmas per se, over the holidays, Thanksgiving, the rest of the holidays there. And then first year, pending weather, we will restart our cab meetings, our full board meetings like this one in the January timeframe. So props to Manise and Bridget for all their planning and hard work, getting all this extracurricular activities done. And I'm open for a couple questions, and we're back on schedule. All right, barring none, Madam Chair. Well, we noticed it's not a full moon this week, so.
Okay, thank you, Lee. And Minnie, she'll be able to send out all the dates and information.
I'll be happy to do that, ma'am. And just to let you know, we set a special meeting, but it's going to be virtual on June 28th. So it's a combined committee meeting from 10 to noon.
Okay, thank you very much. And we are back on schedule. We will now move on to the wrap-up discussion. And before we did, I arrived late. I had some business I had to tend to before I arrived here. So I apologize. I'm thankful I was able to make it, but my name is Sherilyn Atsedy, and I am chair for the Northern New Mexico Citizens Advisory Board. And for our wrap-up discussions, we wanted to go around and see if anybody had any further questions or a presentation. And I will rely on Vice Chair to start out with those attending virtually. Elena, could you moderate this part of the wrap-up discussion? Thank you.
Moderate, yes, Madam Chair. Let's see who's online. Marty, do you have any comments, wrap-up questions? No? Thank you. Sterling?
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you, Marty. Sterling, do you have any questions, requests for talks, presentations, any other discussion?
Thanks, Elena. No comments or questions from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sterling. And thank you, Marty. And I believe that's all I see for our online attendees, our virtual attendees. Back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair, for the information. We'll proceed now in the room. We will start with Manuel. Thank you. Roger? Thank you. Stephen?
I'm good.
Thank you. Mark?
Just to verify, is it June 15th, Lionel Tour on a Thursday?
21st.
21st. Thank you.
Is there something that was said on July 15th?
No. July 15th? The CAB meeting.
And Venice or Bridget will send out a notification with these
Yeah,
dates
I'll
again.
send out the list of dates. Yeah. Yeah.
Patricio?
I just want to say thank you for having the meeting today. It's a pleasure being here in this historical building. It was really nice. Also, just wanted to clarify for our Chromium plan update in June, will you send an update on that as well for the meeting? Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart?
I was eagerly awaiting the publication of the EM newsletter that came either this morning or yesterday to see how the spin doctors would deal with Mr. White's visit here, unexpected public hearing, but I see they chose discretion over valor and didn't publish anything about that. I was ready for bear.
Thank you. Anne? Jim? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance here. Thank you to all the presenters who made their time and to answer all of our questions. I'm very thankful for everybody for that, for Denise and Bridget for setting up the meeting, also for our audio and visual crew that we have here. We didn't have any glitches, and we have great sound quality, and we are very thankful. We have the new audio equipment here, and we can actually, there's quite a few features, and when we have elections in September, we could actually use that instead of doing a pen and paper and walking around. So that should be pretty interesting. And if you notice, there's several features, and I think as we progress, we'll be able to use them.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. So, safety discussion real quickly. They are working on the truck route, and it's open and closed intermittently. So traffic starting in about the next 15 minutes really picks up. And if you're not out of here by 4:45, you're going to experience probably about a half-hour delay. When you get to the roundabout, people in Los Alamos and lab folks going off the hill don't understand the zipper concept of one car versus another car merging in. So it's a free-for-all, and it's relatively rude. So with that, you can't get out without going by the airport. You have to use the airport. You have to go by the airport and go by the roundabout. So it doesn't matter if you stay on this one. Yeah, you're actually better off. So with that, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much. Good meeting, folks.